It could have been an ordinary wedding, a day when two people who love each other beyond measure promise to spend their lives together in sorrow and joy. While the priest reads his speech, the guests wait with bated breath as the lovers tie the knot with their promise of family life. Everyone is eagerly awaiting the sacred promise that the heroine, magically shining in a snow-white dress, will finally say, "Yes, I love him." At the wedding ceremony, they should promise to share joys and sorrows, support each other in difficult times, and live with devoted hearts. The cherished moment had arrived when the bride, Satine Del Mare, had to promise to respect and love her only husband for the rest of her days. When it was the bride's turn to say the cherished yes, she loudly declared to the whole hall that she definitely couldn't do it. The nation of Caldabranca in the beginning was the devil. He used evil spirits to penetrate the weak hearts of people and strengthen emotions like doubt, envy, and anger. One day, when the era of people was coming to an end, they began to attack each other for unknown reasons, and 5 good guys gathered to save this world. A hero appeared who received divine revelation, and under his leadership, people began a war with the devil. 15 days later, the protagonist's holy sword pierced the devil's cruel heart, and the war between demons and humans was over. At the end of a long battle, the hero was greeted by the people and proclaimed king, and as a result, the holy state of Caldabranca was founded. The comrades who helped him remained guardian families who faithfully and devotedly protected their people. Over time, the story became legend, and the guardian families became obsessed with power rather than protection, including Salvio and Del Mare, who entered into an engagement agreement in the womb to balance the forces. The goal was to combine the powers of the two families to keep Cardion under control. The heroes prepared for the wedding for a long time to match the ceremonial attire, but unfortunately, before the wedding, the groom broke his leg. The heroine, Satine Del Mare, was discussing an upcoming event with her future husband, and it seemed to her that he was not listening to her at all. Her husband's name was Jorn Salvio, and he was simply sad that he couldn't do anything to help because of the injury. All the preparations were going on before he broke his leg. It was a wedding that both families were looking forward to, and everything had to be perfect. Satin was puzzled as to how he had managed to get hurt, but a situation had arisen in which he could not help but intervene. At one of the events, a strange thing happened. He saw such violence right before his eyes, and he simply could not pass by. The young man was a good man, as befits a man from Salvio, but the heroine was sure it would have been better if he had not suffered. She knew that the girl he helped was a prima ballerina of the Bolshoi theater. Lost in thought, Satin began to remember something, and it seemed she had even heard something about this girl. Her name was Delilah, a girl with lush red hair like a rose and clear, transparent blue eyes, a beautiful appearance, outstanding acting skills, a charming voice that is impossible to tear yourself away from. Every production she played in became a hot topic, but even such an actress was mistreated by her patron. Jorn thought he and Satine hadn't gone out anywhere for a long time, and she had just invited them to her performance. Satin was surprised that she had decided to thank her savior in this way, but it seemed that not everything was smooth here. She was supposed to give tickets in gratitude for the help. They say the performance will be incredible, and Jorn would love to go to it. Satin heard that the lady had serious problems with her patron, but had she really already returned to the big theater? If she still had problems, she would hardly have invited the heroes to the premiere of the new play. Jorn suggested that if Satine was very busy, he could go there alone, but going together was a good idea. Since urgent matters have already been completed, this will be a good last date before the wedding. The newlyweds decided to meet later, but for some reason a slight sadness appeared on Jorn's face. Satin left the room, wishing her fiancé a speedy recovery, but she had clearly been feeling a strange uneasiness for the past few days. He seemed a little strange, unable to concentrate on the conversation, and his thoughts seemed to be somewhere very far away. They were bound by an early engagement and shared every moment of life. Satine could notice every change, and Jorn was a very passive person from childhood. She did not know the passionate love that they write about in plays and books, but they believed that they did not need such passionate love at all. There is nothing more valuable than a comfortable relationship when people know each other well, a relationship when they have long since become a real family. Satin tried to make an excuse for it, and Jorn is probably just nervous about the wedding, even if he doesn't show it. Walking down the corridor, she noticed a maid passing by who was carrying some strange red robe in a basket. Taking a closer look, she clearly saw that there was a satin dress in the laundry basket, which, in her opinion, was not in the wardrobe. Satin immediately approached the maid, who was frightened by her appearance, and decided to find out what kind of dress she was carrying. The maid always told her mistress only the truth, and Satin knew that her husband definitely didn't like such bright colors. The lady declared that this bright scarlet dress belonged to Lady Delilah, that same famous prima. At first, the lady thought she was imagining it, but the maid confirmed that the dress belonged to a prima of the Bolshoi Theater. On the day that young Master Jorn was injured, she came with him to the mansion, and it was she who helped the master get to his home. It is from that day on that she has been here for protection purposes, so that similar situations where some admirer harasses her do not happen. Satin found out the information she needed and asked the maid to return to her work. And now she found out whether the prima of the Bolshoi Theater had really been at the Selvio estate all this time. It was about her safety, but it all sounded too suspicious to be true. But the most suspicious thing was that Jorn carefully hid this information from his bride, and he couldn't even look her in the eyes during the conversation. Perhaps the heroine was now thinking stupid thoughts, but she could not deceive her feminine intuition, which told her that something was wrong here. Jorn clearly has a terrible secret that must not be revealed, and the secret concerns the prima donna Delilah and that very evening when they found themselves intimate. Perhaps Satin was exaggerating, and if the groom wanted to avoid meeting her, he certainly would not have invited her to the performance. True, he wouldn't have made such a stupid mistake just a few days before the wedding ceremony they had been preparing for their whole lives. She was sure that no one understood better than them the importance of this marriage, this promise between families and the harmony of the Guardian Alliance. And Jorn certainly wouldn't do that to his beloved before an important ceremony, just for the sake of love. After she saw that ugly red dress, she still decided to talk to her lover to find out the whole truth. Because it was not without reason that doubt had settled in her heart, and she had to make sure that she had simply made up some ridiculous nonsense. The next day, a premiere was scheduled to take place in the Empire's huge theater, and the heroes decided to attend at the invitation. Getting out of the carriage and looking around, Satin felt all the luxury of this place, and she had not been to a large theater for a long time, and her future husband, Jorn, leaning on a cane, met his beloved to go in together. They did not arrive at the theater together. The young man arrived much earlier and assured them that his leg was almost perfectly fine. Satin smiled and admitted that she hadn't thought the young man was so kind, and even after 20 years she was still learning new things about him. There was a warm, pleasant conversation between them, and with a happy smile the future husband suggested entering the theater to see a grand performance. They got good seats, although Satina didn't expect much since it was an invitation, but they prepared seats in the center of the family spectrum. She must have been very grateful that the prima had prepared the seats at that time, because the tickets sold out too quickly. Satin heard that the nobles had no room for this performance and were sitting on the ground floor, and could it really be that she was such a stunning actress? Silence reigned in the hall the show was about to begin, and the Empire's leading prima was eagerly awaiting her entrance. The velvet curtain rose, and soon Satin saw that same girl Delilah with pink hair, and she turned out to be even more dazzling than the heroine expected. And she was very interested in what her singing and playing were like, because it was no coincidence that all the inhabitants of the Empire admired her talent. Her voice was incredible. It was not just beautiful, it was all-encompassing. In it one could hear the whisper of forest nymphs, the peals of thunder, and even the quiet rustle of butterfly wings. Each note seemed to touch the most delicate strings of the soul, causing a storm of emotions in the audience. For a moment, Satin seemed to have her body trembling, her captivating voice, as if embodying emotions in technique, melting the hearts of the audience. She was so charming, and it was impossible to see anyone but her on stage. Suddenly something fell next to him, and it was the cane that Jorn had been leaning on. As soon as she looked at the face of her future husband, she did not recognize in him the man with whom she had lived all her life. It was an absolutely beautiful performance, right down to her flowing hair, and after the performance, Jorn was so touched and happy to have seen something like that. He praised Delilah and admitted that he would have regretted it for the rest of his life if he had not seen this performance, which was impossible not to lose himself in. The young man continued to talk about how such a frail body could produce an incredibly strong voice, while Satin wondered how much longer he would talk about this topic. She knew he was so moved by the performance that she had completely forgotten the pain in her leg, but Jorn had been praising Delilah for hours now and had not stopped praising her. Her charisma on stage was something that could not be expected from her usual behavior in everyday life. And as soon as he said these words, Satin paid attention to them, because she did not understand when he had managed to communicate so closely with her in everyday life. The lady said that now he speaks as if he knows a lot about her usual behavior, but in that case, where did they manage to communicate for so long? Satin had good reason to suspect him and asked if Jorn really thought she was a stupid little girl. She couldn't help but know that the prima had stopped at this place, Cel Vio, and after her words, real fear appeared on the young man's face. And he didn't even arrive early to escort his bride, since he apparently escorted the prima donna of the Bolshoi Theater, and her speech wasn't finished yet. Then she wanted to ask why he went so far to hide it, and no matter how much he tried to convince her now, the fact of the lie would not change. A woman's heart could not be deceived. The young man was attracted to this girl. The prima was luxurious, especially considering that Giorne had always been an emotional person. Now he was in Vio, and was it really necessary to explain what their marriage meant? The first union in history of two families of guardians, a fact that was nauseatingly well known. He stated that if Jorn wanted to claim that his feelings were not pity or admiration, but true love, he should not be so ambiguous. The young man was clearly confused by the girl's words, realizing that he was making a huge mistake. Satin decided to leave first, and now on this seemingly wonderful evening she learned a lot. The wedding dress fitting was scheduled for next week and was to take place at the Del Mare family home. And since the gentleman can freely lean on a cane and go to the theater to see a performance, he can certainly come and choose a wedding dress for his bride. Finally, Satin admitted that she had not at all expected such behavior just a couple of days before the wedding from the man with whom she had lived her entire life. It was not an insult to her at all, it was not an insult to the prima, and it was not an insult to himself. The following week, a grand wedding dress fitting took place at the famous estate of the noble Del Mare family. Satin dreamed of looking at precious jewelry and choosing a wedding dress, but that day was already overshadowed. She was still angry at her future husband, and today she didn't want to try anything on because of her intense anger. The lady from the salon offered to look at a variety of dresses made from the most luxurious fabrics brought from abroad. The appointed time passed, but the problem was that there was no news from Jorn, and she couldn't believe that he had decided to do this. He is usually indecisive and somewhat frivolous, but he didn't even have the courage to say whether the engagement was off. Satine was so angry that she was ready to rush towards Yorna and teach him a lesson while her mind was seething with rage. Larry noticed that the lady was very angry and suggested trying on the dress a little later, since some of them had not yet been delivered. All this time the heroine was silent and looked menacingly at one point, and the caring maid suggested that she take a walk and breathe some fresh air. Satin didn't resist the walk, definitely helped change her mood and get rid of her angry thoughts. Her head, which had been boiling with fire just a moment ago, was gradually cooling down, but she couldn't understand what Jorn was thinking about when he missed today's meeting. Perhaps there is no talk of any love here, and he did not even come today to indirectly tell her that he was going to call off the engagement. And what kind of love is this that makes a person give up everything? But today, fate decided to bring her together with another person. The girl was walking slowly through a luxurious, fragrant garden, and suddenly a young man rode up on horseback, asking why she was strolling at such a time. This man was definitely familiar to her, and admitted that he had not seen Satin for a long time. The noble gentleman in the black waistcoat smiled slyly, and called the lady the same shorty she had been all her life. Instead of a noble greeting, the young man burst out laughing and once again called Satin shorty, as if he incredibly liked this nickname. It was strange that they had managed to meet just now, and indeed, their last meeting had been too long ago. It was Sir Rubler Cardelon, a venerable gentleman whom Satine had already known in her youth. The Cardelon family was the most powerful among the 5 guardian families, and they had been raising holy knights for many generations. Rubler showed exceptional talent and surpassed the family's fame with his own reputation. As the leader of the Holy Knights, by assuming the title of Paladin, it was he who strengthened the position of the family that was already in the lead. But what was he doing here today? Rubler laughed and said that if she continued to stare at him like that, he would soon turn red as a lobster. Satin noted that the gentleman had not changed since childhood and was still the same impudent person. He still made her feel uncomfortable, and he was sure that they had been quite close in the past. The gentleman recently returned to the capital, so he decided to drop in here, and since he saw Satin, she suggested that he leave so that he could choose a dress without his supervision. He heard that the boy had suffered, and since Jorn couldn't do it, he mockingly offered his help to the lady. The young man stated that Satin definitely needed to make sure that the dress would match the groom's suit, but the heroine categorically refused. A few minutes later, the two of them were sitting in the wedding studio, and Satin was perplexed as to how this could have happened. She didn't have as many dresses as the gentleman had assumed, and she just wanted him to leave right now and stop bothering her with his stupid questions. She finally tried on the first dress with an incredibly tight corset that fit her figure perfectly. She looked at herself in the mirror, the future bride, and could not understand whether she needed this wedding dress. The dress looked quite luxurious, a pleasant snow-white color, but suddenly Rubler asked her not to wear it under any circumstances. She didn't want him to interfere, but the young man warned her that if she tightened the corset so tightly, she would suffocate within 30 minutes. Satin asked Laurie's assistant to bring the next dress, and there was indeed some truth in the gentleman's words. The next dress had tight, long sleeves, and Rubler wondered why anyone would wear it in such weather, and the silk was heavy for this season. The gentleman was really knowledgeable on the subject. The next dress was poorly made and turned out to be too big. He carefully assessed each outfit. One of the dresses had a beautiful design, but still there was something wrong. The young man declared that Satine was too short for a mermaid dress, and her short stature was not suitable for such a dress. He might continue to call her Shorty for a long time, and in my opinion, the gentleman has lived only to tease Satin since her time at the academy. What she really wanted was for her lover to just be there, sharing a precious moment with her, and it was just the turn of the last dress. The maid smiled, admitting that thanks to Sir they finished quite quickly, and his tastes turned out to be very similar to the mistress's. Satin didn't even notice how time flew by rather quickly, and indeed, none of the dresses suited her. She didn't want to admit it, but she already knew that her taste was similar to Rubler's. From the presence of clear likes and dislikes, and if he were not Rubler, they could have become good friends. All this time, the gentleman was evaluating each outfit, and they still couldn't find the right dress. He continued calling her Shorty and asked how long it would take her to change. It was the turn of the last dress, and when the lady appeared in a wedding dress that was radically different from the other models, the gentleman suddenly fell silent. For some reason, he looked intently at the girl, as if he was enchanted by her beautiful, charming appearance. Satin noticed that he had the same reaction when he found something to tease her with as a child, and when they were still just children, and they really had a lot in common, until Satin decided to enter into family ties. For some reason, Rubler remained silent, and whether this dress was really strange, but the heroine liked this design the most. Twisting around in front of the mirror, she couldn't figure out if there was something wrong with the dress, but it was beautiful, and there was nothing strange about it. Rubler approached the girl and declared that this was definitely not the dress to wear to the only wedding in her life. And the whole point is that she looked so beautiful in it that he almost confessed to her incredible beauty. Satin angrily turned away from the gentleman, declaring that he was an incredibly skillful liar, and it was a pity that she had invited him along with her. Despite Rubler's sweet rudeness, Satin agreed to choose the last dress. Gently touching her hair, the gentleman admitted that Jorn must understand how incredibly lucky he was with his bride. The grand wedding was just around the corner, and many aristocrats were busy discussing the upcoming events. Many were looking forward to this, some were envious, and some were sure where else they could find such a kind person as Jorn. Satin was talking to her friend, and she admitted that the young man must be very busy, but he still managed to buy those tickets 2 days ago. And everyone saw Sir Jorn, who was waiting for someone with a beautiful yellow bouquet there near the entrance to the big theater. The aristocrat was sure that she and Satin were at the Bolshoi Theater, but at that moment the girl couldn't believe her ears. This definitely couldn't happen. 2 days ago, there was a day when she stayed up late choosing a wedding dress with Rubler instead of Jorn, who never showed up. Apparently, this was the day when the young man chose his beloved mistress instead of his bride, and continued to hide everything, and the girl had to find out about it through others. Her friend didn't even expect it. She was scared. Did she accidentally say that it wasn't so? Because Satin's face literally changed in a second. Someone announced loudly that the youngest son of the Jorn family, Selvio, had recently been challenged to a duel. It was decided to arrange a duel over the prima of the Bolshoi Theater, and it was he who challenged another nobleman from it to a duel. The aristocrats whispered that the youngest son had always been quiet, but it turned out he had that side too. The ladies immediately fell silent when they saw Lady Satine standing right next to them, but unfortunately the ladies no longer even had the strength to feel sadness. Fury and anger burned in her soul. She did not want to be deceived and wanted to prove everything was true. The heroine burst into the large theater, into the prima's main room, and she was not mistaken, her future husband was here. The sound of a loud slap echoed throughout the room. Satin silently walked up and hit her hated husband in the face. She couldn't believe that his family's promise and 20 years of trust meant nothing to him, and she wasn't going to tolerate being treated like that any longer. Jorn didn't expect to see his future wife here, and in that second he realized the truth had been revealed. The young man insisted that the lady was angry with him, but in his opinion there was a special reason for this, and he only asked to listen to her. Satin's emerald eyes flashed menacingly, and she couldn't understand what other reason there could be. And so it's all clear, no reason can justify turning Delmar's daughter into a laughingstock overnight because of some prima. Could it be that the man who fought in a duel to protect the girl, the demon who wore Jorn's face, and as a guardian, he could react calmly to injustice? And why was it he who had to maintain order? And hearing these words, the young man said, "His bride is incredibly wise." He asked her to remember how he told her who had injured his leg last time and came here to beat up Lady Delilah. Jorn allegedly tried to reason with him, but when the gentleman waived the contract and began to attack, the only way for you to save her was to fight a duel. And if Satin had been there, the young man was sure she would have definitely supported his decision. If the lie had been there, it didn't matter whether she would have stopped the attack, who the victim was, how successful Delilah might be. For the nobility, singers were nothing more than toys to be bought for their beauty and talent. And she knew exactly how artists were treated under the guise of patronage, so she offered to become her patron herself. Satin offered to give her money and send her to another, safer country, where Jorn would never meet her again. Jorn couldn't let her go and continued to insist that he would marry Satine, in which case he would break off the engagement as soon as possible. She turned to Lady Delilah, who had remained silent all this time and sat with a frightened face, offering, if the prima so wishes, to buy her exceptional talent and make her happy in another city. And if a lady simply needs sponsorship, Satin offered assistance and financial support. When the parents found out about the cancellation of the engagement, they were against it, because Satin should understand the significance of this marriage. The families had been waiting for this union for 20 years, and now, right before the wedding, the girl decided to call it all off. The parents were cleaning, Jorn acted thoughtlessly, and the daughter just needs to turn a blind eye to it, and in the end, she is a simple singer. The guests have long since arrived for the wedding ceremony, and there isn't a single person in Caldabranca who doesn't know about their wedding in 3 days. The young master of the house, Selvio, and the beautiful opera singer, an actress burdened by tragedy, and the noble man who saved her. Everyone will tell the story of their fairy tale love, along with the pitiful story of how Satine married against her will, bound by an old family promise. Satine didn't want the world to laugh at her as a noble lady who married without a drop of pride, and that certainly wouldn't strengthen the union of the house. The parents insisted that their daughter would be remembered as a virtuous lady who defended the family's honor despite scandals. Besides, in 3 days she will become the mistress of the house, so she will be able to send her away, but then she will have to become the villain who drove the poor girl away. For Satin, things were not so simple. She did not want to live with a man who kept her as his mistress, who doesn't show her a drop of respect, a drop of attention, and didn't even show up for her wedding dress fitting. The parents asked their daughter to stop behaving like a little child because it was a matter of respect between two families. Father was sure that Jorn had probably hidden his mistress out of respect for his wife, and this could be taken as a good sign. The stain on Selvio's name means they owe a debt to their family, and her parents told their daughter to just not worry. In any case, the child would be the future of the Del Mare and Selvio family, but now Satine did not want to go that far and protect something by enduring misfortune. If this marriage takes place, they will become lovers recognized by Jorn's wife, and when she is not at home, everyone will assume that he is with her. And then the heroine will live the rest of her days in complete solitude, like a doll, deprived of all her feelings and pride. At first it will be better to feel guilty, but in the end it will become impudent, and the lady knew from the very beginning what she was getting into. Finding herself in this terrible, absurd situation, the girl just wanted to forget it all as a bad dream and live in another world. No matter how she thought about it, she understood that she would not be able to bear this marriage, because there were many other suitors besides Jorn. The father asked his daughter to stop being stubborn and accept the fact that no one would be better suited to keep Cardillon under control. This demon-tainted treaty, signed before the Great Disaster, can pass quietly without any loud scandals. The family insisted on the wedding, and Satin thought every minute about the best way to take revenge on the dirty traitor. Something was needed that did not contradict the law, and the maid remembered that her mother had once told her a story. The lady was dating one gentleman, but at the same time she was holding hands with another because he trusted her as much as he trusted his friend. In a situation like this, you have to deal with that person's best friend, and that would be the most devastating blow, but Satin didn't want to stoop to his level. She asked why the maid was in her room, and she was sent to make sure that the lady did not run away, but she simply had a guest. Perhaps the respected young master had come to ask for forgiveness, but when the door opened, Satine realized it was not Jorn at all. This was definitely not her stupid, naive fiancé, but a respectable gentleman whom she had managed to see quite recently. Rubler leaned on the door and called himself a rather important guest, and as always he was self-confident. He came without warning, quite unexpectedly, and the young man was sure that they didn't need all these formalities now. Satin asked to be reminded which ones we were talking about, and she didn't remember her and the gentleman becoming so close. Rubler called himself a trusted comrade, a guardian, and a dear friend, and perhaps some of that might be appropriate. As much as he wanted to make fun of him now, she said she was not in the mood and suggested meeting another time. The gentleman had no intention of mocking her. He had always been sincere with the lady, even when they were still very young children. One day they met little Satin for the first time, and from the moment Rubler saw her, something strange still happens to him. He wanted to tell her about this, about his intentions, and Satin menacingly asked what had brought him here so suddenly. He was drawn to the rumors from Jorn and everything that was happening in their relationship right before the wedding day, and suddenly he decided to offer his help so that the girl's honor would not be tarnished and her reputation would soar. The gentleman considered this marriage to be a complete absurdity, and how dare such a scoundrel as Jorn make a beautiful lady suffer because of another girl? These were words no one had ever said before, words she longed to hear but never thought would come from him, and yet she would have to go to this ridiculous wedding anyway. Nothing was said about the broken engagement. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, and the two families were to tie the knot with their children. Rumors are circulating throughout the capital that the groom is crazy about his mistress, the same prima from the Bolshoi Theater, and the aristocrats discussed it right before the wedding. People were sure that having a mistress was completely legal and common, but this happened right before the wedding and was very cruel to the bride. In the end, everyone only felt sorry for Satin, and Mr. Rubel could not allow the honor to be entrusted to the lady, even when the beginning of the ceremony had already been announced. Every bride in the world dreams of being a star on her day, stepping out in a luxurious snow-white dress and feeling like the most beautiful princess. Decorate the hall as she wished, put on that very dress, stand before the cardinal, exchange vows. The perfect wedding that Satine had dreamed of was about to become a reality today. To the horror of stupid Jorn, the dream of a lifetime became a path to hell, where Satine in a wedding dress stood on the red carpet on her way to the groom. A quiet, perfect path without a single clap. Even the whispers of the guests sounded like mockery, and such silence was killing her today. Satin just wanted to get away from here as quickly as possible, to leave everything behind and disappear if only she could do it. Unfortunately, on the other hand, on the head of the cheating husband, she slowly walked to the altar. Now she couldn't even be angry, and supposedly Jorn found the courage to save the poor prima from violence. And now he was cowardly under pressure from his family. It was just funny. The young man was falling lower and lower in her eyes, but suddenly she heard a familiar voice. The bride apologized for interrupting the ceremony, but she really wanted to see the man singing the hymn. This voice was painfully familiar to her, alluring, enchanting, making her heart beat faster with every note. When the wedding attendant pulled back the curtain, she was horrified to see her mistress singing the wedding hymn. A woman from the Bolshoi Theater with pink hair and an emerald dress sang the anthem at the wedding, and Satin couldn't believe her eyes. People in the hall started whispering about whether this was really the singer that everyone was rumoring about, and how dare Jorn invite her here. At that moment, Satin was so disgraced, and her fiancé brazenly invited his mistress to their wedding. Satin asked her future husband what was going on here. Why was this girl singing a wedding anthem when there were plenty of other singers in the city? Jorne asked her the day he hurt his leg. Satine dreamed of the perfect wedding, and he thought she would like it if the best soprano of their time sang the anthem. She herself said that she liked the Prima's performance, so Jorn tried to prepare it and was surprised that his fiancée didn't like it. What an incredibly shameless question, and it would have been better if he had simply stayed out of the wedding until the very end. Jorn never once thought about what kind of wedding Satin really wanted, and he was not involved in the organization at all. And now he couldn't be honest, and before the wedding all his thoughts were occupied only with this blue-eyed, red-haired lady. Jorn didn't even look at his bride, he was staring at Delilah, and it was as if he didn't hear the guests whispering. Stupid Jorn staged the worst wedding in the world. The priest began to read a speech where two people should share joys and sorrows and support each other in difficult times. Satin noticed that all this time the future husband could not even take his eyes off the lady, and she only wanted him to forget about the wedding vows and simply admit that he wanted to marry this woman. The priest asked the husband to answer the questions of whether he took Satine Del Mare as his lawful wife. Delilah stood quietly near the curtains. The priest asked her to swear that the young man was ready to respect his only wife and love her until the end of his days. But Jorn never looked at his beloved. He looked at Delilah and said the cherished yes. Everyone present in this room knows to whom this oath was actually given, and what he was thinking when he spoke these words so easily. The next oath Satine had to take was that she would love and respect her fiancé for the rest of her days. Respecting her husband, what a cruel contradiction. From the very beginning to the end of the wedding, it was just a brazen deception, and Jorn never showed her respect. And now was the very moment when Satin proudly refused and declared that she would never connect her life with this terrible, impudent man. The guests were simply shocked. The bride refused, and just confidently declared that she would never marry this man. Had such a thing ever happened in the history of the Holy Nation, but the Del Mare family had reasons to be angry and a scandal erupted just before the wedding. Satin finally exhaled. Now Jorn looked at her and asked what she was doing. It was an impulsive statement, but not entirely thoughtless, but rather coming from the depths of the heart. If the scandal had escalated further, if there had been more secret meetings between them, it could have been presented as love across social inequality. Unfortunately, neither now nor on the day of the magical wedding, when Satin learned the whole truth, and now she was the true victim. The lady turned to the priest, declaring that she could not make false oaths before a representative of God, because this man did not love her at all. Satin told the dirty truth. There has been another girl in Jorn's heart for a long time, and she cannot utter a false oath. With such an open admission, the ties between families will be broken, and what can she do if they asked for it themselves? Jorn begged him not to do this and suggested they talk privately after the ceremony. Here, everyone already knew the truth. Jorn was so blinded by this woman that Satine was just an empty phrase for him. And the lady asked loudly how long he thought he was going to hide the whole truth, that he would change, or that he would continue to avoid it. For the first time in the history of the capital, a bride refused, claiming that the groom had already had a mistress for a long time. The young man begged Satin not to act immorally, but suddenly someone in the hall said, "The girl is right." Mr. Rubler appeared among the guests, and no one could understand what kind of man he was and why he was on Satin's side. The gentleman declared, "A real deception. He promises to spend his life with someone, loving with all his heart from another person. And first of all, one of them will regret their choice for the rest of their lives, but until then, I didn't understand why he decided to interfere." Suddenly, the young man dropped to one knee right in front of the altar and announced that he too had a grand proposal. Extending his hand forward, he confidently invited Satin to become his wife and hoped that she would take the hand of the man who truly loved her. Rubler, in front of all the guests who came to this wedding, proposed to Satin to marry him and did not doubt his choice at all. Satin and Jorn were betrothed in their mother's wombs, a friend who had always been by his side, a person who was closer than family. He had never in his life thought about marrying anyone other than Satine, and that fact hadn't changed even after meeting Delilah. He thought that Satin would understand him, but no matter how much he explained, she did not listen and became more and more angry, and in the end he received a notice of dissolution of the engagement. The Del Mare family, upon hearing of what had happened, reacted in the same way the family's daughter was offended, and the stupid child Jorne did not understand how he had disgraced the family with his marriage. The only one who hugged him when he suffered in silence was Delilah, who always knew her place. Then the people confessed that if the Lord's marriage was destroyed because of her, she would not be able to look Lady Satine in the eyes. Delilah asked Jorn not to worry. By freeing her from that man's violence, he had become her savior forever, and she just wanted him to never forget her. Jorn might not fall in love with a kind and sweet girl, so at the planned wedding he made a false oath to protect the lady he loves, and when the wedding was over, he wanted to run to her and hug her and whisper that everything would be fine between them. Even if he had asked to break off the engagement, the marriage of aristocrats is not only their personal matter for the sake of their families, the marriage cannot be cancelled. Del Mare will receive a son-in-law who will join the family, and Giorne wanted to keep the promise he made to Satine. Nothing will change now, it was meant to be, and now on his wedding day, another gentleman proposed to his bride. No one even thought that the wedding could turn out like this. Right before Jorn's eyes, the venerable gentleman extended his hand, made an offer, and he did not understand what was happening here. All the guests immediately thought that not only the groom, but also the bride had a secret lover, but more importantly, this lover was a Cardillon. The young man was about to quietly step aside after hearing Satin's words that this was being done for the sake of the family's promise, but now he could no longer just stand and watch. Satin didn't expect at all that the gentleman would come to her wedding with such a decision. It was a marriage she would have to enter into with someone anyway, and Satin tried to scold her old friend in a whisper. Her gentle hand was touched by the warm lips of the gentleman, who quietly said Satin would be better off marrying him. The lady said that the gentleman had gone crazy, and how could he behave like that at someone else's wedding? If she accepted his proposal, this wedding would be theirs, and even in this confusing situation, the heroine's mind worked like clockwork. An interrupted wedding, a broken union between two families, and a new happy family with Mr. Rubler. The breakup of the marriage between the guardian families was clearly not going to end peacefully, and everyone understood this perfectly well. The priest's eyes were completely frightened this news would reach the temple through Cardillon. The temple will certainly not be pleased with the discord between the guardian families, who have been planning this union for 20 years. Everyone will put pressure on Satin in every possible way to convince her to get married. She may be in the role of a victim now, but over time this impression will fade, and the aristocrats will still whisper behind her back. Rubler, who says he is her secret lover, appeared completely unexpectedly, but if she marries him, she will get rid of the problems associated with the temple. You can't control who you fall in love with, but her lover turned out to be a paladin. She prioritized her engagement over her family, and aren't Selvio a bit selfish? And perhaps her impudent husband simply lied to provoke a strong reaction from people. Satin had felt this for a long time. Rubler was a different person, with an irritatingly sharp mind. Because of this, Del Mare will become Selvio's enemy overnight, and she will be separated from her best friend. On the other hand, Jorn will not live happily with his mistress, and the reputation of the Primus will grow, which will lead to even greater success in the future. And is this really the ending that Satine wants? In this case, the lady was only interested in what the gentleman would receive by providing her with such assistance. All he needed was for this girl to be by his side all her life and just marry him. The heroine had no idea what this man was thinking, and if she took this hand now, she would take a completely different step. Del Mare joins the Cardillon family, which ranks above other guardian families and has a higher title. Among the guardian families, Cardillon is on a completely different level, and if instead of simply containing them, they unite with them, the parents will certainly be pleased. In that case, what awaits Mr. Rubler, for whom another bride was clearly intended? The master had achieved a high level as a temple paladin through his own skills, so he did not need to make a sacrifice for his family. And would he really just be happy if Satin married him, and they were happily married for life? The gentleman was waiting for an answer, and here, in his opinion, everything was obvious, and looking at this wedding hall, he understood how much effort she had put into the wedding. Satin had meticulously worked out every detail and done everything she could to bring glory to the family, but she had done enough, and now she could be selfish. Rubler openly gave her permission to be selfish, and he spoke the words she most wanted to hear. It's true that no matter what she did, there could be nothing worse than what already happened at the wedding ceremony. Therefore, without thinking twice, Satin gave her consent and extended her hand to the gentleman, believing in their future happy marriage. She placed her gentle hand on his palm, and it was the wisest decision she could make right now. The priest declared that it seemed that everyone had finally found their partners, and that the wedding ceremony could now finally begin. He asked Rubler if he was ready to take this woman as his legal spouse in order to respect and love her for the rest of his days. The gentleman responded with consent, and Lady Satine was next to answer whether she was ready to take this man and love him for the rest of her days. He asked the same question to another person, but surprisingly the lady felt great, and now the bride and groom could seal their vows with a kiss. Somehow, everything turned out just as she said, and it will be a huge blow to Jorn for his brazen deception. Rubler promised Satin in front of all the guests that he would never betray her and would treat her with care and special respect. Looking into her eyes, he promised to make sure that she would never regret her choice and such an unexpected decision. Jorn and Delilah, who brazenly deceived her, the changed groom, and apparently this was fate for the main character. It turned out to be a crazy wedding, where nothing remained but lies, but the warmth she felt when she kissed the gentleman was real. The bride and groom were in love with other people, a switch occurred at the ceremony, an incredible once-in-a-lifetime wedding, and news of it spread throughout the capital in less than a day. One of the main figures in this scandal was the bride herself, Satine del Mare, whose name was now on every lips. All this time, the heroine enthusiastically ran away from the reality that had happened, when the next day she woke up with another man's wife. She still couldn't stop thinking about that wedding, and the maid saw that the mistress still couldn't come to her senses. She called her milady, but immediately realized that she should not call her mistress that anymore. Even Satin didn't understand who she was now and what she should be called. Now she has become a real lady. Yesterday she married a noble gentleman from a completely different family. With each passing minute, vivid memories returned to her, that unforgettable kiss and that crazy wedding. And the more Satin thought about it, the more real chaos arose in her head, from which she could not get rid of. The lady tried so hard to put it all out of her head, and to think she married the man she had been in contact with since graduating from the academy. Even when they were children, he always irritated her, and stupid Jorn was then worried about the little girl. Faint memories of Jorn swirled in her head, and surely time really did bind. The man she trusted the most had left and betrayed her. It is quite possible that Rubler may also turn out to be the same as Jorn in the future, and in the future everything may be possible. Satin tried to calm down, and no matter how much she tore her hair out, the wedding had already taken place. Spilled water cannot be collected, and the shards cannot be glued back together, but at least some things can be cleaned up. The Code of Laws of Caldebaranca, the book in which Satine decided to find answers to her questions. It wasn't too late yet. Right after the ceremony, Rubler was dragged out of the temple on family business, and he was incredibly busy, while the heroine had to find some way out. On this day, loud voices echoed through the temple as Rubler was ordered to go on a 2-month mission. The priest ordered simply to visit the provincial dioceses as a representative of His Holiness, but the gentleman had just gotten married. The young man warned he should have said this in advance because he had not even made a schedule, and asked for his understanding. In return, he promised to make sure that the gentleman got a decent vacation after this, and asked him to simply relax. It could have been a joke, because the dear paladin burst into the wedding, pushed the groom away, and finally took the woman he loved. His assistant said he was willing to give him a vacation for this, and he just had to take his word for it. His assistant was still the same as before, with different behavior in public and in private. The hero was the eldest son of the current pope, Archbishop Kirian, heir to the great papal throne. Since the next pope is chosen by a divine oracle, until then the pope's child can only inherit the title of archbishop. Despite this, people are betting on Kirian to become the next pope, not only because of his brilliant mind and abilities, but also because his younger brother was hopelessly inferior to him in everything. The oracle will definitely choose Kirian, no one doubted it, and when the time comes, Rubler must become Kirian's sword. When they first met, it seemed like Kirian had anticipated this. He was the first to extend his hand and say that he wanted to be a friend, not a master. No joke could offend, and formality seemed inappropriate, and the young men became such close friends. When they first met, Kirian remembered Rubler was a wild, untamable horse. Who would have thought that he had such a romantic side? Kirian asked his friend how he managed to win the heart of this sweet and beautiful girl. Her eyes became razor-sharp every time she saw him, but it wasn't all bad. Kirian admitted that if she thought about it, she could very well fall in love with her old friend and live happily with him. Rubler could have filed a complaint against the Archbishop's speeches, but Kirian was not involved in such matters at all. And he said that he would have gone instead of him if he could, but now he needed to remain in the Holy Throne, and his energy was no longer the same as before. Time is catching up with everyone. Everyone was worried about the Pope, and the Cardinal said that no one can defeat time, and it is necessary to begin preparations. Rubler understood the situation perfectly well, and asked when he would return from his trip, and whether he too should remain near the Holy See. That's why Kirian was his friend, and he understood perfectly well that Rubler had literally just married his beloved girl yesterday. It was his job to ask the young man to just enjoy his honeymoon, but there was something else he was still interested in. He heard that the Prima was also at the wedding. People were talking about nothing but her, and he became curious how surprised she was. Is she really that amazing? And even stupid Jorn fell in love with her, as the rumors say. Satin and Delilah could not be compared to each other. These girls were completely different. And during the wedding, the gentleman closely watched the Prima's behavior, realizing how smart and dangerous a woman she was. He saw that she was a bit of a flirt, but he was not interested in her, because nothing good would come of it. Kirian placed a small, beautiful bouquet of blue hydrangeas into the gentleman's hand and asked him to accept it as a small thank you for the information. It was a wedding gift from him. The young man was sure that his bride would definitely like the cute bouquet. The gentleman looked angrily at his friend, who laughed, and didn't he really want his girlfriend to receive flowers from another man? Kirian noticed that Rubler was head over heels in love and asked if she had really sunk into his soul that much. The gentleman remembered very well that day when he was still a boy. They met at the academy, and he saw Satin for the first time. The question was absurd to him, and from the very first second he realized that this was the most beautiful girl in the world. Satin was charming from the very first time they met, and all his life he was sure that fate would bring them together one day. After hearing the touching story, Kirian thought it must be a great happiness to give an oath to such a sweet girl. In fact, the gentleman was incredibly happy. He did not want to part with her for a second, and right then he decided to go to her. Like a boy in love, Rubler hurried to Satin, but he was met with an unexpected announcement about an impending divorce. Holding a lovely blue bouquet in his hands, the gentleman did not expect to hear this on the first day of their married life. He suggested that they talk calmly and wanted to add hot milk to her mug of tea, but Satin had not drunk milk for a long time. Of course he couldn't know about it. One day she stopped drinking milk after one incident. It was because of Rubler that she no longer liked the taste of milk, because just one word caused a storm of furious emotions in her. One day, a little girl was studying at the academy and was in a hurry to get to a lecture, but Rubler was always somewhere nearby. She didn't even notice how she crashed into his whore with all her strength and screamed loudly in surprise. The little girl fell to the floor and asked Rubler for forgiveness, but he looked so stern as if he was about to hit her. She realized that this man was definitely Rubler, from that famous Cardion family. They say he is a genius swordsman, and when you see him up close you always feel a huge pressure and incredible fear. And so it happened. The little girl fell to the floor, and young Rubler declared that she was so small that it was hard to even see her, and then for the first time he called her Shorty. The girl was taken aback when she heard her new nickname, but for some reason she wasn't offended at all. He called her Shorty. That was her first impression of Rubler, and from that day on, every time he saw her, he called her Shorty. One day, young Rubler brought the girl milk and said that she needed to drink a lot of milk to grow up, and if she was picky about food, she would remain small. He had disturbed her like this dozens of times, so Satin developed an inferiority complex due to her short stature, and as a result, she intended to avoid Rubler. And now, when she saw milk, she remembered Rubler's face, who teased her every day, and because of this disgust, she could not even take a sip. The young man decided to talk about divorce and ask why she wanted a divorce, since they had just gotten married yesterday. The heroine had a huge, thick book in her hands, and in it she read really good things, and it was a factory of laws. Satin read it while the gentleman was away, and there are some conditions 3 months after the wedding, the reflection period ends, and you can file for divorce. Rubler already knew this information, but now he silently wanted to listen to the opinion of the lady who had answered yes herself yesterday. There is also the agreement process, the property division process. It is a bit complicated, but in any case it will take at least 3 months. That is, all this time the lady studied the divorce procedure in detail, and it was not without reason that she spent so much time. While Rubler missed her incredibly, as soon as he finished work, he immediately returned, and he was a little offended to see such a reaction from her. He asked again if she really was going to get a divorce in 3 months, and for Satin it was obvious. The gentleman did not quite understand what was obvious here, and yesterday they gave each other a vow to live together happily ever after. He didn't understand why they couldn't just be spouses and live together in love and joy, respect and care. The purpose of this marriage was to unite the two families of guardians, and the lady was sure that he did not need the Del Mare name at all. After all, not only did he not need this surname, but he also desperately hated it, so they should begin divorce proceedings as soon as possible. Rubler did not expect to hear such words and menacingly asked why she thought he hated her. As a boy, he always bullied her since their time at the academy. That was a long time ago, and that's why Satin made this decision. The gentleman was indignant. Did she really want to say that he got married only for the sake of family, and was this really the only meaning of marriage for her? At least that's how it was for her. At the moment of her birth, the person with whom she was to spend her life was chosen. She believed and relied on Jorn all her life. Eventually, the marriage fell apart due to Jorn's decision to choose another girl as his one and only love. Love intervened in a marriage that was concluded solely for the sake of family harmony, and this is exactly what happened to the main character. Of course, the divorce announcement would be as big a deal as the wedding itself, and she knew that everyone would be talking about her first. But she didn't want to spend the rest of her life with a man she couldn't trust, and now she wanted to make her own choice. Satin wanted to find a man with whom she could spend her whole life happily, and this was reason enough for the gentleman to agree to a divorce. The young man understood what she meant, and now that he knew her opinion, what she wanted, he wanted to think about it himself. He admitted that he had something to say, but by order of His Holiness the Pope he had to leave tomorrow on a business trip for about 2 months. Therefore, the gentleman suggested discussing this after his return, and gave Satin a small, cute bouquet. The lady was surprised why he was giving her flowers at such a moment, since they had just been talking about divorce. Rubler whispered in the girl's ear to remember their past, and her memories were slightly different from his. The next day, Rubler left early in the morning, and Satin was left to live alone in the newlywed's house without her husband. And just when she was getting used to family life on the new estate, her parents sent a message asking her to come. Satin couldn't refuse, so they immediately went to Del Mare's native estate to see their beloved parents. She felt very nauseous the whole way. She hadn't been to her parents' place for a long time, and she felt awkward. Surely your parents will sit and ask you all day about Rubler, how kind he is, and how wonderful it is to marry such a person. Satin was planning to get a divorce soon anyway, so seeing her parents' happy faces about her wedding did not give her any pleasure, and she felt guilty, and her conscience tormented her. And she felt incredibly sorry for both of them, but the lady had no intention of living miserably. Her current home was located in a natural area on the outskirts of the city, away from the hustle and bustle of the outside world, and living every day in peace and quiet. Such a secluded life seemed quite pleasant. If she gets divorced, she will have to return back to her family home, which was radically different from these conditions. The corridor she had found now seemed strangely unfamiliar, although she had recently been a member of this family, but now she was only a guest. She announced her arrival out loud, calling her mother and father so that she could finally see them. A few days had passed since she said she didn't want to get married, and her parents were puzzled by her relationship with Journey, but now they greeted her with a smile. The father remarked that everything seemed to be going well for their daughter and that she looked very good. He called her today only to give her something that rightfully belonged only to her. This could not be, and seeing the box, one opened her eyes in surprise, because she understood perfectly well what was inside. The box contained a sacred relic of the Del Mare house, which was to be given to the daughter after the wedding. The father stated that his daughter should probably have expected this, but for some reason Satin didn't understand why this moment had come now. The relic looked like a useless piece of metal, but Satin knew the history and meaning imprinted on it. The relic, symbolizing the founding of the holy state of Caldebranca, was proof of divine revelation. Satin asked why her parents decided to give her away now. The happy mother admitted that their beloved daughter had finally gotten married, and so the moment had come. She asked that the relic be kept and one day passed on to her child, and at that moment the box seemed to fly out of the lady's hands. The lady couldn't even imagine that she and Rubler would have wonderful children, because literally today she already decided to divorce him. The daughter couldn't tell her parents about this and simply admitted that it was too early to think about children. Her parents told her she should focus on producing an heir and ensuring the continuation of the family line, but for some reason she talks nonsense instead. The father was sure, his daughter knew perfectly well, that the bloodline was rarer than that of any other noble family. That's why he was always worried, but now that Sir Cardillon became his son-in-law, he finally became calm. The father wanted his daughter and master to have a healthy child who would definitely take after his father and become a great man of the empire. In the end, Satin simply accepted the relic and left, and now her soul became even heavier. Of course, the heroine couldn't even say a word about work. She didn't expect her parents to talk about the heirs, and they were so happy and full of expectations. She was just glad that Rubler wasn't there, and if he had heard them, they would have talked for hours about their grandchildren. Since he had apparently somewhat resigned himself to the idea of talking about divorce, she decided it would be better to come along and tell them when he returned. Trying to reassure herself that everything was fine and going according to plan, the lady returned to her new life, and the box with the family heirloom haunted her, because it was a huge gesture of respect from her parents. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, but now the heroine wondered if she could do it and disappoint her parents. At this time, Mr. Rubler had already arrived at the temple. He was met by the priest after a long journey. The paladin was greeted with great pride and grandeur, for this man was truly significant. The young man thanked him for the hospitality, and the priest congratulated the gentleman on his recent wedding. The young man was surprised news of his wedding had already spread, and rumors always spread faster than the wind. The Del Mare family had long been known for their deep devotion to the temple, a beautiful union of two young aristocrats, but it was only a picture, and the priest believed that for them this marriage was nothing more than a symbol of the union between the guardian families. However, he had been waiting for this news for a long time, and had always hoped that the noble guardians would cooperate as if they were one family. Now that at least two of them were married, the priest felt relieved. He was proud of the paladin's decision, and those who had lived their entire lives in the capital could not understand it. But here on the border, people sometimes encounter strange things. The phenomenon was incomprehensible to the human mind, and the priest suspected that it could be the work of evil spirits who had once served the devil. The Lord heard that when the devil was sealed, most of the spirits disappeared, and only a few barely managed to escape. The archbishop is not one to throw words to the wind, so there really is something fishy going on here. He asked the gentleman for forgiveness for keeping him late, and the young man was probably tired and had better go and rest before his upcoming duties. Rubler concluded that evil spirits had begun to act, and it looked like he wouldn't be returning home anytime soon. The later he returns, the happier Satine will surely be, and she probably thinks that when he returns, she will finally be free from the hateful marriage. The gentleman had long ago decided that everything would not go according to Satine's plan, and he was not going to let this chance slip away so easily when his beloved was already in his arms. Whenever he thought about her, he remembered the most charming version of her from the past, when they were studying at the academy. One day he overheard a conversation between children discussing how the children were engaged in the lullaby, and it was no wonder that they were always together. Then Rubler became interested in who they were talking about, and they were talking about those two, Del Mare and Selvio. He thought they were pale and small, like a squirrel and a rabbit, and since they looked alike, that's why they stuck together. When he first met them, he didn't pay much attention to it, but one day that changed. It was the cold season, and everyone was coughing every now and then. Then almost the whole class was sick, and little Satin was taking care of her friend, who was coughing very badly. The two were constantly inseparable, and Rubler constantly kept an eye on them and saw how the little girl was worried about her friend. The children were exactly the same age, but it turned out that Satin was a little older. They were sitting at adjacent desks, and then Rubler deliberately coughed loudly so that the girl would finally pay attention to him. Without even turning around, she threw a throat lozenge on his desk, thus showing her first concern. It was a kind gesture, and then he realized that Satin was an incredibly kind girl with a huge soul and a big heart. Without looking at him, she handed him a lollipop because she heard how loudly he was coughing. A small, silent gesture that somehow calmed the boy, and he remembered this lollipop for the rest of his life. The toffee that Satin gave him was so sweet that the boy almost felt dizzy. The memory, which had been absorbed into his feelings for more than 10 years, turned into a tender melancholy that did not give him peace and did not allow him to forget. Even now he could taste that caramel, and he missed that girl incredibly, and his thoughts were occupied only with her. There was a knock at the door of the office, and an assistant came in to report that something suspicious had been discovered during the night's patrol. This required the paladin's attention. He was offered to look at it personally, and as soon as Rubler was on the spot, he was horrified. Nobody understood what had happened here. A bunch of dead crows lay on the ground, and it looked like a hellish omen. Early in the morning, the maid ran to her mistress. She was a little excited, as if she wanted to tell her something. She entered the mistress's bedroom. Satin was sitting on the sofa, and did not expect such an early appearance at all. Having asked Larry what could have happened at such an early hour, the lady waited for an answer. With joy, Laurie stated, they understood the flag on the city wall, the flag signifying the return of the Holy Knights. Satin didn't even notice how time flew by, and 2.5 months had already passed since their departure on the expedition. Time flew by mercilessly, and she still couldn't figure out how to properly formalize this worthless divorce. And she was not at all ready to meet Rubler right now, because he was supposed to return later. Only Laurie was incredibly happy, offering to prepare the lady a warm bath, which should help her relax. As expected, only good-natured Laurie fully understood her mistress and sensed when she was under stress. After a hot bath, the maid brought the lady a translucent nightgown instead of her usual clothes. At that moment, Satin realized that she had been brazenly deceived when she was offered to meet the gentleman in such attire. The nightgown was so transparent that every detail of the girl's body could be seen, but the maid continued to carefully cover her mistress with a blanket. Laurie insisted it was a beautiful nightgown, but to Satin it now seemed like some kind of stupid joke. It was unlikely that anyone would sleep in such a thing, but the maid smiled and said that the nightgown suited the mistress incredibly. If she doesn't like it, she can put a robe on over it, but the robe she offered was even more transparent. For some reason, today she brought clothes that the lady never wore, but all this was only so that the paladin finally returned. And according to the maid, there is no faster way to get closer than by wearing a revealing outfit. Larry spent a long time choosing, but for some reason the lady didn't like the transparent short nightgown, and she insisted on another garment. She didn't know if she was overdoing it, and the paladin wasn't a bad person at all, and Satin knew this perfectly well, but she was definitely not ready to meet him in a transparent robe. The heroine also didn't think that Rubler was a bad person, it's just that they had a rather complicated relationship since childhood. It was a little chilly in the nightgown. The fabric was so thin that the girl decided it would be better for her to go to the bedroom. She opened the door to the room and decided to leave, but the paladin was already standing in the doorway, looking at the lady in a translucent robe. And as soon as Satin realized that he was standing right in front of her, she had nowhere to go. The transparent robe sat perfectly on her figure, emphasizing all her advantages, and Rubler could no longer look only into her eyes. She was sure he would be waiting in the living room or in his office, but for some reason he immediately decided to go to her room. He had initially said that he would stop by the temple first, and Satin wondered if he had already finished submitting his trip report. The gentleman looked at her and thought that Satini was a little girl both outside and inside, but her clothes said otherwise. And he certainly couldn't take his eyes off the beauty of her beautiful body, which was tenderly covered with expensive silk. She covered her chest with her hands to somehow hide her beautiful assets, and a flame of blush was already burning on her face. Unable to restrain herself, the heroine simply slammed the door in the gentleman's face, declaring that it was not what it seemed. Burning with shame, Satin blushed so much that she just wanted to scream with indignation. After all, the gentleman had just seen all her charms, and he looked like a pervert, with an intent, animal-like gaze. In her mind, he definitely thought that Satin had been waiting for him in such an outfit, and he would surely live up to her expectations. Whatever Rubler had in mind, they met at the wrong time, and after slamming the door, the girl sat on the floor, hugging her knees, thinking about divorce. She had made up her mind that she would get a divorce tomorrow and throw the divorce papers right in his face without discussing anything else. She was no longer that sweet little thing, that little girl. For him now he saw in her a real woman, charming and attractive. And after this hated translucent nightgown, apparently he will no longer be able to call her Shorty, as he did in his distant childhood. Satin quickly changed her clothes and headed to her husband's office, angrily throwing the divorce papers on the table, and declared that they could now get a divorce. Almost 3 months had passed, and Satin had already listed the reasons, so all that was left for the gentleman to do was sign the official document. Just recently, the lady was so bold, meeting him in a translucent robe, and the gentleman thought that she had clearly changed her mind about the divorce. Satin cited personality differences as the reason, as they are the most neutral, and confirmed that a terrible mistake had occurred when she said yes. The young man read the official document carefully. His gaze was thoughtful, but he was in no hurry to answer. And suddenly Rublin admitted that he never agreed to a divorce, and it was solely his wife's wish. Satin didn't understand they had agreed on a divorce, and seemed to have finished discussing it before his trip, but the young man really didn't agree. Besides, personality differences as a reason were silly, and the boy stated they had not spent enough time together to make that claim. Right after the wedding, he went on a business trip, and to be honest, they barely exchanged a few words. Moreover, if you file for divorce immediately after a long business trip, your father is more likely to personally act as a mediator than to agree. So he asked again if the lady was still planning to submit the documents, but she couldn't describe her true feelings. For her, her family was a temple, but in front of her stood an annoying husband who teased her all day, and she couldn't honestly say that she simply hated all of this. So she tried to come up with other reasons to get a divorce. Without thinking twice, she declared that there was only one other legal reason for divorce that would definitely work. The lady said that they are not even a loving couple, practically strangers, so how is it possible for there to be intimacy between them, as between spouses? Unexpectedly, Rubler asked if she was willing to try some intimate activities to prove that they could be a loving couple. The young man came closer to her, while she looked at him with frightened eyes and could not imagine what he would do now. Without even noticing that he had managed to get so close, Rubler's gentle hands had already touched her lips. And gently hugging her around the waist, the gentleman suggested trying and seeing if that same tender intimacy was truly impossible for them. Satin didn't pull away, but rather moved slightly towards him, as if succumbing to an invisible force drawing them towards each other. Out of fear and uncertainty, the girl covered the young gentleman's lips with both palms so that he would not touch her under any circumstances. In fact, she was just so scared that she lied, saying that the maid had just called her, and she wanted to run out of his office as quickly as possible. The stunned lady suggested they talk later, but she disappeared without a trace as soon as the gentleman tried to get a little closer to her. From that day on, she could no longer move freely around the house. Rubler had never left the estate since his return. The heroine simply didn't have the courage to meet them and behave normally, so she immediately hid as soon as she saw his silhouette. While waiting for the order of knights to finally start working so that the master would no longer be in the estate, Satine still felt uneasy. After that day when his lips almost touched hers, she became irritated every day as soon as she saw him. Rubler understood everything perfectly well and still managed to meet, and lately it had been too difficult to see her, but still he achieved his goal. Satin tried to act natural and stated that in fact she simply didn't notice him, as she was just heading to the bathroom, suggesting that the gentleman step away. Now he stood in front of her, assuring her that the bathroom was in the opposite direction and that Satin should definitely stop lying. She's been living in this house for 3 months now, and doesn't she know where the bathroom is? Satin's face grew redder and redder, and she simply stated that she actually had topographical cretinism and that she periodically got a lot of things mixed up. The gentleman laughed. It was the first time he heard it, but even this part of her turned out to be very sweet. It was all useless. No matter what she said, his reaction remained the same. She decided to divert and leave as quickly as possible, but the young man warned her he was given leave after the expedition. And for Satine, this was the most terrible thing now, because the master would constantly be at the estate, and she would no longer be able to avoid him. Rubler touched her hair, and Satin involuntarily shuddered. This light, almost accidental gesture burned her skin like a brand. He penetrated her armor like a sunbeam through fog. His touches, his looks, his words all paved the way to her heart, melting the ice that had bound it. He asked why Satin was so surprised, and didn't she understand why he took an unplanned vacation right after the wedding. The lady ran to her room, and burying her face in her pillow, she realized that she didn't want to know anything, and didn't want to think about anything anymore. Larry asked if the lady had found out how many days of vacation Rubler had received, but she never asked him anything. Maybe she was still interested, but she wanted him to just rest a little and come back when he was ready. The maid insisted that the mistress should have asked about this, but she was so embarrassed that she completely forgot all the words. Larry stated that even if they were in a fake relationship, they are now a married couple and they need to start having conversations to get closer. Satine simply wanted to keep her distance, and even the maid noticed that she was deliberately keeping her distance from the paladin. The maid admitted that she still hates Mr. Gjorn, who broke the girl's fragile heart. She knew that the lady was always cautious, but she was never so closed and cold. She was always a person who looked good with a bright smile and happiness in her eyes. After Mr. Gjorn's betrayal, Satine changed greatly, and that happy smile no longer flashed across her face. Larry assured that everything had changed for the better now, but she was still upset and very worried about her mistress. Being next to her, Laurie was also sad, but she understood and felt everything perfectly, and did not want the lady to be sad. Yes, she was right. It was all a huge shock, and Satine never thought that Gjorn would betray her out of love. What is love? What is this thing that makes a person blind and deaf, and makes him act so impulsively? Even as her rage raged, there was a part of Satine that envied the lovers, and as the heiress of the House of Del Mare, bearing the burden of expectation, she had never known what love truly was, and perhaps it was a feeling she was never destined to understand. Since things turned out this way, Larry really hoped that the lady would live happily as a couple, at least to prove to Mr. Journeau what he had lost. The lady understood that the maid was very worried, but Satine did not particularly trust Sir Cardillon either. Satin always thought that she knew Mr. Jorn better than anyone. They spent 20 years together, and this is an incredibly long time. Jorn's heart turned to another in an instant, and Rubler's heart could also change one day, because after all, it was an extremely impulsive marriage. As soon as everything calmed down, the heroine planned to quietly divorce, so she warned Larry not to get attached to this house either. In response to this, the maid merely offered to bring tea to lift the lady's spirits. Satin touched the box containing the family heirloom, and indeed she really wanted to live happily as a married couple. But it was very difficult to do this, almost impossible, and it was very difficult to trust anyone else now. Rubler entered the room and saw that the lady was holding a family heirloom. He asked if she had already received it, and it seemed that the Del Mar family had already recognized him as a worthy son-in-law. Satin was indignant at how a gentleman could barge into a lady's bedroom like that, but the husband was allowed to enter his wife's room, and he even knocked properly. The heroine was about to get a divorce. She asked him to keep his distance and stated that he couldn't just barge into her bedroom. Every word she said hurt the gentleman more and more deeply, who had had great sincere feelings for her since early childhood. He asked if she had really been avoiding him to keep her distance before the divorce. Rubler didn't want this, and abruptly laid the lady down on the sofa and declared that if he didn't give her a divorce, then there was no need to maintain this distance. He stated once again, as he had said before, that he had wanted to marry her for a long time, and that she was the most beautiful girl in the world. Rubler wanted to win her over, wanted her to love him with sincere love, and admitted that he wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. This was the kind of marriage he had spoken of at the temple ceremony, not understanding why she still continued to reject him. Satin was always planning for a future that hadn't yet arrived, trying to force herself to fit into its framework. He looked into her eyes and wanted to explain that marriage still seemed meaningless to her. A lady certainly shouldn't make him meaningless in the eyes of the gentleman, and it hurts him every time he hears these words. Rubler was a capable and dexterous knight. When it came to pursuit and capture, he had no equal in this matter. So he asked again who would win this game of tag, and he was ready to bet that victory would be on his side. He still leaned over her like a majestic beast, and Satine could not move, captivated by his masculinity. Rubler decided not to torment the girl any longer, and simply asked her not to take his words as a stupid joke. And leaving the room, he wished his wife good night, and she still felt the touch of his gentle fingers on her face. Every step he took made her panic, wanting to run and hide, but at the same time she was agonizingly curious about what would happen if she allowed him to break down her walls. And what might happen if she dared to trust and open up and yet become vulnerable. Selfish, arrogant, and above all, hating Satin Rubler. The moment that made him remembered like this was at the fencing tournament at the academy. One day, there was an opportunity to watch students from guardian families compete. Jorn was still a beginner in fencing, and it was obvious that he would lose to the students who were striving to become a knight. Then Jorn was shaking and didn't understand what to do and why all the students had to participate in this tournament. Satin tried to support him in every possible way and suggested that they simply lose with dignity and then go to the festival together. There was one fact she had overlooked while trying to comfort the trembling boy. The weight of his name was Selvio. Among the students in the same course, there were many more experienced participants than Jorn, but the moment the judge called his name, his opponent voluntarily pounced, and he had no fencing skills. He allowed himself to be impaled, pinned, and struck before declaring his defeat. Meanwhile, the winner, the only one, was Rubler Cardillon, who rose through the tournament bracket solely on the strength of his skills. Rubler, who made it to the finals thanks to his abilities, and Jorn, who made it to the finals under the name of the Guardian's family. The news that these two had reached the finals filled the stands with students eager to watch the spectacle. The meeting of the two families took on a significance beyond the fencing tournament. Satine knew things were pretty bad, and Jorn would be crushed. The only thing she could hope for now was the chivalry of Mr. Rubler. She didn't even expect that Jorn would win this fight. She was sure that he would be able to do at least something. The purpose of a fencing tournament is to teach, and according to this principle, insulting the opponent is prohibited. Moreover, they usually get along well with each other, and Satin has never seen the young men quarrel. Jorn held his sword with trembling hands, ready to lose this battle in disgrace in front of all the students. Satine was the one shouting loudest from the stands for Jorn to try not to worry, and she really believed in him. Then Rubler was surprised at how much this fragile girl supported this dove, who was completely incapable of anything. The start of the tournament was announced. The students held their breath, and silence reigned in the stands. The result exceeded all expectations. It was the one who is said to have the makings of a paladin, and Rubler treated Selvio like a toy. Of course, Jorn quickly lost, and the final winner was Rubler Cardillon. The first thing Satine did was run to her friend Giorna, finding him on a bench in tears. She asked him not to be upset. The young man really tried, but no one could resist Rubler. It was truly a miserable defeat, and Jorn felt humiliated and depressed. The young man sat all alone, his head bowed, and it seemed as if he was about to burst into tears like a little boy. Trying to calm him down in every possible way, Satin suggested going to see the festival, and she heard that there were many interesting stalls there. Jorne was furious and accused Satin of the match being a bad idea and how a rookie like him could beat someone so experienced. Everyone was probably laughing at him, and Jorn screamed he should have just given up from the start. Satin had incredible faith in him and was glad that he didn't give up and fought to the end, trying his best. Father, those who laugh are just fools. Jorn immediately apologized for his anger, but the lady understood him perfectly and nevertheless offered to go to the festival together and have a wonderful time. At that moment, Rubler, who became the rightful winner, was passing right next to them. He walked past silently, and Satin was indignant at this ignorance, and saying hello to an opponent after a match was elementary etiquette. From that moment on, he became a vile man to her, and she a stupid girl who expected chivalry from Rubler. The next day, a grand celebration for all the students took place in the Academy's ballroom. Satin planned to take revenge on Rubler for his vile behavior, and the chance to take revenge presented itself much sooner than she expected. Who would have thought that the same Rubler would come to a group dance evening, and to think that they turned out to be partners? They had to dance a ballroom dance, but each time the lady desperately stepped on the young man's feet. Rubler gently hugged her around the waist, pretending that nothing was happening, and never once showed that he was in pain. On the contrary, he continued to smile sweetly and behaved like a noble gentleman. Satin planned that the young man would not be able to pretend for long, and she furiously continued to step on his feet, deciding to see how much he could endure. It seemed as if you could hear his bones crunching, but Satin continued to dance, stepping on his feet. Nothing changed on the young man's face. He did not say a word, and all of Satin's efforts were in vain. The lady wondered if he really felt no pain at all, and she deliberately tried to step on all his legs. Rubler didn't make a squeak. At that moment, she decided to step on his shoes even harder. Suddenly, people felt that she was falling, but during the dance, the young man, looking into her eyes, firmly grabbed the girl by the waist, preventing her from falling to the floor. Satin couldn't believe what had just happened, because she was literally ready to fall a second ago. The venerable gentleman had just caught her and felt her fall, although he could have calmly let her go and even laughed. After this dance, the young man left the dance hall as usual, and a few days later rumors began to spread throughout the academy. Satin found out that after the dance, Rubler did not dance with anyone except her, and felt a little remorse for her boorish behavior. Rubler now went to the papal court to talk to his friend after the expedition. The young man greeted his best friend with a happy smile and asked how his vacation went and how he managed to spend time with his wife. It seemed that such questions made the gentleman feel uneasy, and a crooked grin appeared on his face. The friend wanted to know all the details, because they were definitely not just playing mother and daughter, but Rubler said nothing special happened. Kyrian was upset, which means his friend really didn't do anything, or simply doesn't want to talk about anything. Rubler stated that 3 days was too short a time for anything special to happen, but suddenly he declared that he was behaving inappropriately for his age. When he was younger, he was much more charming than he is now, and many girls went crazy over him. His friend was simply dissolute, but he thought that this could be called charm and attention from the female sex, and both his friend and his wife looked mature, but inside he considered them still immature children. Rubler arrived to talk about the report an evil spirit had indeed appeared in these lands, and if someone else had provided such a report, Kyrian would have simply laughed, but this news was brought by a trusted person. It all happened at the wrong time, with rumors spreading right before the country's founding day, and it couldn't be ignored. The gentleman would like it to be just a joke, but the talk about the evil spirit is indeed true. He noticed a pile of papers on Kirian's desk and asked if he hadn't slept all night again, rereading documents. The job wasn't going to magically disappear, and with Rubler here, he could finally take a little break with his help. The gentleman thought that if he suddenly broke down in such a situation, it would be problematic, and asked him not to overdo it. Kirian decided to find out what Rubler's current relationship is with the young gentleman Selvio. After all, after everything at the wedding, he assumed that the young man had not even seen him since then. After the chaos at the wedding, the Jorn family inadvertently benefited from Rubler's actions. Since Rubler had completely diverted attention from the scandal that could have been his undoing, everything turned out much more favorably. The Selvio family, finding themselves in a desperate situation, managed to escape public condemnation and rumors quickly. Satine suffered greatly in this process, which angered the master. But despite this, the result was more than satisfactory, and Kirian had already managed to send out an invitation to the ceremony on the occasion of the founding day, and Jorn simply came to his mind. They couldn't allow friction between the families at such a significant event, so the priest thought he could act as a mediator as the archbishop. Rubler immediately refused, and the young man suggested inviting that scandalous lady to the event. He already excluded her from the entry because of the relationship, but it would have been better if she had participated. This could turn into a big scandal and stir up rumors about a terrible wedding. Kirian was sure when such an opportunity would arise again, but Rubler still asked Kirian not to be interested in this woman. He listened to the gentleman's opinion and stated that the event should take place without any problems. And after these words, Rubler felt relieved, suggesting that they meet soon, when the day would finally come and he would meet his wife in person. Early in the morning, Satin received an invitation, and she was so excited that she was even afraid to open it. An invitation to a foundation day that she had no desire to attend and only wanted to avoid if she could. Now she was the wife of a respectable gentleman, and frankly speaking, she did not want to appear there at all. The country's founding day, a ceremony in honor of the legend of the founding of the Caldebranca, where 5 holy relics appeared, is attended by the families of the guardians and high-ranking nobles, and the lady has never missed the annual event. This means that most of the guests who attended the wedding will gather there. And of course, the matter will definitely not be completed without Mr. Jorn, who is obliged to be present at the event. If Satin goes, he will inevitably run into himself, and then all 3 of them will end up in the same place. People will naturally remember the scandalous wedding, and this event will easily renew the dying scandal. The heroine just wanted to escape to another country, but they would have to pretend to be a married couple, and she didn't know how well she could do it. Suddenly she remembered Rubler's words when he suggested trying to check whether it was really impossible for them to get closer. And can't they touch each other like a real married couple in love? These thoughts, and the realization that she would even have to take the master's hand, made Satin incredibly furious. She was so excited that she suddenly screamed, and Larry offered to bring her a cup of hot tea. The memory of Rubler approaching her was still too fresh, his intense gaze and aura giving her goosebumps. Rubler, with his unpredictability and elusive magnetism, threatened to destroy this fortress. She had never seen him like this before. He gently touched her lips, spoke pleasant words, and she felt that he really wanted to possess her. She was always afraid of intimacy, this all-consuming, will-depriving intimacy. Intimacy seemed like a trap, a golden cage, where under the guise of love and care you are deprived of yourself. Fortunately, after that day he didn't come to her anymore, and she had a chance to think. His calm, distant demeanor only made her more uneasy. His dark blue eyes were etched into her memory like shards of glass, and Satine couldn't stop remembering those rough hands that had touched her lips back then. While he was at home, she spent every night without sleep. She behaved strangely around him, and she had no idea what kind of face she showed him. Determined to stop thinking about meaningless things, Satin decided to focus on work to occupy her thoughts. She had been withdrawn into herself for so long that it was time to get used to pleasant communication again, and this afternoon she went to Madame Xian's salon to get some fresh air and socialize. A few hours later, the noble ladies met their friend in the salon, and no one expected her to appear. The aristocrats had not seen each other for a long time, and everyone was interested in what new things had happened with the lady. She was glad to meet her friends who still called her Satin, because she still couldn't get used to the status of Madame. The aristocrats were shocked. That scandalous wedding was truly incredible, the appearance of this woman, and then the sudden public separation. Then the venerable paladin, kneeling before her, proposed to the girl, and every lady wanted to be in that situation. One of the girls stated that Mr. Jorn's position in the family was somewhat shaken after the scandalous wedding. Her friend suggested that Satin was probably uncomfortable hearing all this, and perhaps it should be discussed without her, but in fact, she was even curious. Apparently, Jorn had been looking for another bride to replace her, but to no avail, and despite family pressure to end the relationship, he refused to let her go. People also spoke badly about this prima donna. She ruined the wedding, and many singers and actors were invited to the anniversary of the founding, but she was the only one who remained on the sidelines. For artists, this performance means a meteoric rise to fame and fortune, but she missed this chance, so this woman will not last long as a singer. At least it meant Satine wouldn't have to face Delilah at the ceremony anymore, and that was a relief. Satin was incredibly happy to see her friends the aristocrats wanted the lady to enjoy the salon and have a good time. It was a bit tiring for Satine to talk a lot, but she hadn't talked to anyone or gone out in social situations for too long. Suddenly, Mrs. Eckley approached her with an agitated face and probably wanted to tell you something. The lady was unsure whether she should tell him this, since she was no longer a member of that family. Now she wanted to talk not about the Selvio family, but specifically about the red-haired prima from the Bolshoi Theater, because of whom everything happened. The weather was bad today, it rained all day, and it showed no sign of letting up. It had been raining for 3 days straight, so neither Laurie nor her mistress could even go out into the garden for a walk. They say the damage from the storm was quite severe. The street was flooded with dirty water, the wind was so strong that no one could go outside. Rumors began to circulate that the ceremony might be cancelled, and Satin could only pray that the event would not take place. Due to the continuous downpour, Rubler's workload increased significantly. The knights, busy preparing for the foundation day, had to deal with all the incidents related to the rain. Suddenly, Laurie said that the paladin would return home today, so the lady need not worry about it. The maid noticed that the lady had been looking out the window for a long time in recent days and watching the entrance and the servants. And this means that she is clearly waiting for the return of her dear husband, and Larry was not to be deceived in this regard. Satin said that everything was not at all as the maid said. She was just worried that something might happen because of the weather. She didn't even understand how she herself admitted that she had been worried about Rubler all this time. This was completely out of the question, and Satin could not allow herself to do so, not believing her own feelings. It was already late when the gentleman returned and saw that Satin and Larry were still awake. He assumed his wife had been waiting for him all this time, and as soon as he returned home, Satin was truly happy. She worriedly asked why he was in the rain without an umbrella, but Rubler could not carry it and save people at the same time. He considered himself a fairly strong and healthy young man, and a little rain was not a problem for him at all. The gentleman was soaking wet, and his wife, Satin, carefully wrapped his head in a terry towel. She carefully wiped the raindrops from his face, declaring that even paladins could get sick in such rainy weather. Despite his strength and power, Satin admitted that the master still needed to take care of himself. And the young man, blushing, answered whether she really was worried about him, and he was flattered by her behavior. From the outside, it looked like the newlywed husband was enjoying pleasant care, and his wife was carefully waiting and greeting him at the door. But to make sure it didn't look that way, Satine threw down a towel and asked how the ceremony would even be able to take place with such rain, hoping that they would still decide to cancel it so she would never see Jorn again in her life. Rubler asked if the lady really wanted the grand event to be cancelled due to terrible weather conditions. Of course, the heroine wanted this, and did not think that the gentleman found all this pleasant, but in fact he was looking forward to this day. She didn't understand how anyone could look forward to this day, because he knew perfectly well that Jorn would be there too, and everyone would be whispering about them again. The lady imagined what people might say if they saw them together after that scandalous wedding. The young man carefully took her hand in his, and confessed that she must believe that she was no longer alone. He was looking forward to this event. It was their first public appearance as husband and wife, and he was proud to introduce her. He promised to be by Satin's side so that not a single glance would disturb her, and he wanted to give her the support she had dreamed of all her life. Therefore, Rubler asked his wife not to worry too much, but to simply trust him, because now she was safe. After a rainy night, many people in the empire were in serious trouble, and not a single carriage could pass, and the wheels were completely stuck in the mud. The two gentlemen discussed what to do. The carriage could not go any further, and they would have to walk, but neither of them wanted to walk along the muddy road. Assistants even suggested laying down a cloth and walking on it so that less dirt would end up on the clothes and shoes of high-ranking officials. The men began to quarrel, the carriage was tilted, and the cloth had to be laid out in such a way that everyone could walk on it. The first to exit the carriage was Mr. Giorn Selvio, as the most titled gentleman of all those present. Getting out of the carriage, the young man carefully offered his hand and asked the lady to be careful, as the mud made it very slippery even on the red carpet. A magnificent prima donna emerged in a luxurious, tight-fitting scarlet dress that accentuated her beautiful figure. Seeing the girl, people started whispering, "This is the same lady everyone is talking about. This is the woman who sang at that scandalous wedding. And how dare she show up here when she wasn't invited? She wasn't formally banned. She was simply not invited to sing. But given how precarious Mr. Jorn's position is now, it's unreasonable for her to behave this way." Again, Lady Delilah always did as she wanted and was completely indifferent to stupid prohibitions. This woman was so beautiful that she could drive any man crazy. That's what the aristocrats said about her. If she was Mr. Jorn's companion, the aristocrats would be outraged as to why they should walk on the same path that this commoner had soiled. The independent guest quickly became the center of discussion, and all the invited people only looked in the direction of this couple. A loud voice announced that everyone should immediately move out of the way, because the venerable Lord Paladin had arrived with his companion. The knights lined up, raising their swords high, expressing special respect and reverence to the arriving gentleman. Everyone was surprised when the holy knights arrived, and Jorn looked back and realized that the paladin himself was already here, and he definitely hadn't arrived alone. Lady Delilah turned to look at the arriving knights and knew this day was definitely going to be special. Seated on a black stallion, the gentleman rode, carefully holding the aria of his new beloved, whom he had stolen from that very wedding. The couple looked incredibly tender. Satin leaned her head on her husband's shoulder, who became her only support. But Mr. Jorn and his newly made mistress did not look so luxurious, and most likely they would not want to meet together. The black horse rushed past those present like a whirlwind, and for the first time since the wedding, Jorn saw the girl whose heart he had broken. The ladies were delighted. The gentleman was holding his wife in his arms like a loving couple from a fairy tale, and if they were still newlyweds, all these unpleasant rumors would finally disappear. Compared to this, the price of a moment of weakness now seemed too high, and the prima was well aware of this. It was definitely over with these two. Now the aristocrats saw their true love, and Satine was in safe hands. As soon as the gentleman arrived with his new wife, the sun began to shine, and it was even hard to believe that it had been pouring rain all these days. The guests saw them as the perfect married couple, and every touch of the master to his wife seemed so tender and loving. Some even noted that Satin picks out clothes for her husband, and they look incredibly cute when they look into each other's eyes. This was only from the outside, and in fact, Satin was right now scolding Rubler for driving so fast because she thought she would die of fear. They rode so fast that the girl pressed herself ever tighter against her master. She was usually learning horse riding, not how to survive on a galloping warhorse. The gentleman confessed that he would never have allowed her to fall, and all this time he held her tightly, and he himself was an excellent horseman. Satin declared that there was no need to show off like that anymore, and that should have been enough to show everyone how close they were now. Even though Jorn was not among these people, the heroine was sure that she would fortunately not see him today. People walked slowly into the palace hall, and Satine offered to walk slowly with them. Taking her husband's arm, she quickly walked forward, wanting to end all this as soon as possible. The palace premises were expensive and luxurious, and the heroine walked proudly across the marble floor, holding the arm of the most famous man of the empire. The gentleman noticed her agitation and asked if she was feeling well and if anything was bothering her. It was clear from her face that she was thinking about Jorn right now, but he asked her not to forget that the most wonderful man was next to her. Without hiding her emotions, Satine admitted that Jorn is just her old friend, so she is still a little worried, but she is definitely not worried about his new life. The young man laughed and considered this a ridiculous lie, while Satin tried to prove that she was not thinking about him at all. In any case, it's time for Rubler to stop acting like a brat and focus on the upcoming event. The lady's attention was drawn to a superb painting which depicted a sacred object divided into 5 parts, a fragment of a sword. The sacred relic of Cardillon looked about the same, and this puzzled the heroine a little. So she decided to ask the gentleman if it was true that he also had a sacred relic of the Cardillon family. The gentleman did not expect the lady to be interested in such things, but he did not intend to hide anything from her. Satin admitted that she was indeed a little interested in the topic and would like to know more about it. The Rubler family keeps the handle and base of the sacred relic, which are passed down from generation to generation. The reason so many knights come from the Cardillon family is because they are the only family that has a sword hilt. The same thing happened with the Del Mare family, and they say the tip of the sword points to the purpose of its wielder. The Del Mare family, who received the tip of the sword that pierced the demon's heart, was called the Del Mare of Loyalty, while Sel Vio, who received the central fragment, was the mediator between the two sides, who was called the Sel Vio of Neutrality. The heroes were on opposite sides, it was funny, and did the tip of the sword really point to the target of its owner? That is why the gentleman continued to look at his beautiful wife, and even the family heirloom said a lot. It seemed like it was predetermined from the moment he inherited the sacred sword. Rubler was sure that their fate was predetermined by their ancestors, and he tenderly kissed the hand of his beloved. He was interested to hear the girl's opinion, and he really wanted her to think the same way. When his warm lips touched her hand, goosebumps ran down the lady's skin, and she pulled her hand away, afraid of the unexpected closeness. Crystal chandeliers, like frozen drops of light, illuminated the parquet floor, polished to a mirror shine. Live music played in the hall, and the most famous artists of the empire were invited to make this evening unforgettable. The heroes walked down the red carpet, each of them thinking how strange this year had been. The first guests were joyfully greeted by Mr. Kyrian, who declared that everything went wrong as soon as they entered this room. The gentleman greeted His Grace, Archbishop Kyrian, and in response he belatedly congratulated Satin on the wedding. The lady smiled and stated that it was a bit unexpected, and Kyrian felt a bit sorry that he couldn't attend his best friend's wedding. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, but they had met several times during their studies at the academy, when Kyrian was Rubel's closest friend. Satin was surprised that the archbishop could really remember the years at the academy, and he was even sure that the girl was on good terms with Sir Cardillon. Kyrian winked at the girl and didn't tell her how his young friend constantly teased her. Satin tried to remember if it was true that she had met the archbishop in her early years of study. She finally managed to remember that the archbishop had been a close friend of Sir Cardillon's for a long time. As the archbishop himself said, he personally observed them, so the heroine was sure that no one would suspect anything in their relationship. She was finally getting ready to relax and celebrate an important event, but her gaze unfortunately fell on a familiar couple. With pink hair, bottomless blue eyes, and a bright scarlet dress, walked the prima donna Delilah, holding the arm of her ex-fiancé Giorne. For some reason, this woman was here, and Satin couldn't believe her eyes, as if Giorne had completely gone crazy and forgotten where they were. Recently, a girl approached Satin, wanting to tell her about the prima, and in fact, one day she accidentally saw her arguing with her former patron. By patron, she meant the one who challenged Giorne to a duel, and then the man shouted harsh words on the street in broad daylight. He shouted, after all, in front of him stands a famous actress who was able to fool everyone, and people will soon find out what kind of woman she really is, more terrible than the devil. The man shouted something about a pre-prepared plan, and assured that soon this vile mask would fall off, and people would learn the whole truth about it. Then Lady Ackley said, Delilah just stood there when she heard it, without even blinking an eye, as if it was really true. She just laughed in the eyes of this man, who was clearly disappointed with her behavior, and they definitely had something in common before. Lady Ackley felt goosebumps when she saw that expression, and there was some meaning in her patron's answer too. Rumor has it that she is a pathetic woman under the influence of those in power, but Satin felt that she was not such a simple person. Lady Ackley warned the girl to be extremely careful with her, because the woman was not at all who she claimed to be. After she saw this sweet couple together, she felt a strong tension inside. And the gentleman immediately noticed this, asking if something had happened, because Satin looked so pale, as if she had seen a ghost in front of her. It didn't quite look like a ghost. Most likely it was a cunning villain named Delilah, who simply lassoed her stupid ex-husband. This was the first official event after the wedding. The heroine understood that there would be a lot of attention, but she did not want these two to be here at all. And what is this Giorne even thinking about when he is already looking for a wife? And Rubler could clearly sense her worries and anxiety. The gentleman carefully took her by the tender wrist and said that he knew perfectly well that her head was splitting, her heart was worried, but she needed to try to pull herself together. He asked her to look at him closely, because in his eyes and his hands she could receive that very support. Satin believed his words and felt that he was worried, but the young man only gently asked her to smile. When she thinks a lot, it immediately reflects on her sweet face, and tension does not suit her at all. Therefore, he just wanted his beloved not to think about anything and to focus on having a good time at such a grand event. He kissed her hand tenderly, and among aristocrats, kissing a woman's hand is a great sign of respect. Satin allowed him to do whatever he wanted with her, and a husband should respect his wife more than anyone else, and even family and friends fade into the background. The gentleman noticed that Jorn was looking straight at them, so now they had to pretend that they loved each other immensely. The lady was sure that Jorn had known her for more than 20 years, and he would immediately see through her cunning game and understand what was really going on. After Rubler's words, Satin really calmed down very quickly and no longer worried about what others would think. He suggested that she do it for real, to show the real, sincere feelings that connect them. All this time, Jorn was closely watching the girl he once missed, looking at me as an insidious villain. He couldn't take his eyes off her, and so many years couldn't just pass without leaving behind pleasant, warm memories. Delilah saw how Jorn couldn't take his eyes off his ex-girlfriend, but he insisted that he wasn't thinking about her at all. The insidious lady understood everything the young man constantly looked at Lady Satine, probably experiencing great melancholy. Jorn didn't show his true feelings, saying he was just curious about when the two had gotten so close, as they had never gotten along before. He remembered very well how Satin hated Rubel, and how he loved to tease her in childhood, and the little girl took everything very close to her heart. So it was understandable that she never liked him, but since their relationship was now over, it was perhaps funny that he said that. Jorn realized that he should pay attention to the new lady, and he knew that he was not particularly welcome here. The lady smiled sweetly and confessed that everything was fine, and she understood his feelings, and very little time had passed since the wedding. Throwing herself into the arms of the new young man, the villainess confessed that as long as he was nearby, nothing else mattered to her. Jorn was grateful that she always remained by his side and promised to protect her no matter what happened. He sincerely confessed his love to her and actually had real feelings for the cunning girl who was simply leading him by the nose. Unfortunately, Delilah had her own plans for the relationship, and it is unlikely that she saw Jorn as her future only husband. Among the aristocrats, there was a man who once begged the prima to become his faithful lover a year ago. Another one imposed his perverted tastes, asking to hit him at least once, but there was another one who was radically different from the rest. To Delilah, they were all just poor actors pretending to be worthy noblemen, but who in reality had nothing. On the outside, they pretend to love their wife, but behind the scenes they often visit the big theater, beg and cling to the prima ballerina, simply wanting to touch her at least once. Today was a special day when they saw her for the first time outside the theater curtains, and their behavior changed. None of the men approached her anymore because she devotedly held the arm of her new lover. Sidelong glances were inevitable. Each of these men was captivated by the prima lady, and it was unlikely that any of them had forgotten her. At first, she thought they were pretending not to know her because they didn't want to become rivals with Jorn. While she was watching what was happening, she realized there was a reason, and it was Satine Del Mare's reason the men were ignoring the prima and simply didn't want to offend her. The only heir of the family, a young and elegant girl, and now she even has a husband from the honorable Cardillon family. And it is unlikely that anyone in this country would dare to insult her, but he made it clear to Yorna that the two had always been on bad terms. Delilah watched the paladin's behavior towards his wife, and it didn't seem like he was playing with her. In that brief moment when he was riding on his warhorse, he held his beloved tightly by the waist. Then the gentleman's gaze met the prima's gaze, and it was so cold that the lady was ready to sink through the ground. It was as if he had no interest in a woman like her, and the prima couldn't accept this, because she was sure that every man was ready to fall at her feet. She did not want to get Mr. Rubler, who had never looked in her direction in his life. And how can such a man play with such tenderness and devotion in his gaze, with such affection and care that he treats his wife? If their relationship was suspicious, the villainess was ready to do anything to ensure that the hated Satine would remain alone forever and never know what love is. She laughed sweetly, turning to Jorna, and confessed that it wasn't only people in love like them who kissed and basked in each other's arms. Prima wanted to increase the number of aces up her sleeve, but suddenly Jorna's parents arrived, and he decided to leave the lyre to say hello to them. She wished them a pleasant conversation, but still, no one would approach her at this banquet after what happened. There was another gentleman present whose attention she would like to gain, and this man was always close to Rubler. The only person in this room who doesn't need to worry about these two is Archbishop Kyrian. She thought she saw the young man glance at her while he was talking to the other aristocrats, and she definitely caught his interested look. He had just looked at the pink-haired lady, but their gaze must have simply crossed while he was looking around the banquet hall as the host. At that moment, while the prima was standing completely alone, a plump, short man approached her and asked if the lady had really appeared here alone. The man looked incredibly pathetic and sad, and before time when I didn't see his face. Since she had never encountered him in the theater, he probably lacked power or money, but it seemed he was trying to talk to her for some reason, and Delilah was surprised that he had the right to approach her. For her, he was a bit of a piece of trash that irritated her, so the lady declared that he had left immediately and that she already had a favorite companion. Suddenly, Satin approached them with the gentleman and greeted the man, who turned out to be His Excellency Archbishop Vitalis. It was very strange. Satin was incredibly polite with this man, whom the prima considered a pathetic fool. The short, plump man turned out to be an archbishop, a respectable gentleman who did not at all look like he had a high title. Satin asked if the archbishop was doing well, and they probably already knew each other, and she had great respect for this man. The lady stated that if she had known the cardinal would be present, she would have greeted him first and apologized for her behavior. He congratulated the gentleman and Satin on their recent wedding, which he could not attend for personal reasons, and Delilah was indignant that she was getting involved with this girl again, even in such an absurd situation. Vitalis saw the couple together for the first time and admitted that they were truly incredibly well suited to each other and that his brother relied heavily on Sir Cardillon. The gentleman admitted that his brother cared about him very much, despite his shortcomings, and Vitalis asked him to continue to support his brother in the same spirit. They were joined by Jorn, who had been looking for Delilah for a long time but could not find her in the hall. And now the five heroes stood together in one tight circle, where the destinies of former and current love, and of a completely unknown person, were intertwined. Approaching them, Jorn first asked Satine that he had not expected to see her here and wanted to know how the girl was doing. Swinging her luxurious curls, the lady menacingly declared how dare he ask her about such a thing now, after everything that had happened between them. Jorn sincerely admitted that he had been worried about her condition all this time, but Mr. Rubler decided to intervene in the conversation. He said it was rather tactless to ask a lady about her fate as a greeting after a long silence. Jorn started to get nervous and said that he was worried about Satine just as a friend, but Satine didn't even want to answer him. The gentleman did not make a scandal after the marriage, but he was sure that neither the lady nor he needed his false care at all, and he'd better pay attention to someone else, whom he has chosen as his beloved. These words don't come out. Jorn was at a loss on the spot, and Rubler once again declared that he shouldn't say such things. Worrying about another when the one you clearly love can hear you right now is tactless and pointless. In this situation, Jorn felt so awkward, like a little boy, and Delilah was looking straight at him. Thanks to his courage in fighting for truth and love, the gentleman admitted, he was also able to safely reunite with his wife, and he is sincerely happy about this. Rubler thanked Jorn for everything he had done and for his fateful, decisive choice. The conversation could not be avoided, and the young man only admitted that it was only thanks to his stupid mistake that he was finally happy with his one and only love. Jorn looked completely crushed, and it was impossible to tell from him that he had traded Satine for his only happiness. The young men were from the same family guardians, but the prima did not even imagine that there would be such a difference between them. Those who pretend don't notice looking in their direction, and probably know the whole truth, but Jorn won't be able to defeat these two, Satine and Rubler, and the villain Delilah was once again convinced of her opinion, and more than anything else in the world she was sure of only one thing. Satin del Mare is not just some wildflower. She told her at the very beginning to find her if she needed sponsorship. Despite her refined appearance, she is a woman who is difficult to deal with. After all, it is thanks to the reliable family she was born into, and the prima was sure that if she was born into a guardian family, she would have such power too. Prima and Giorne could easily get married, and the lady could not stop filling her head with such nonsense, and her dreaminess made her a pathetic person. Delilah decided she needed to face the truth as soon as possible, and just in time Mr. Kyrian was approaching them. The gentleman, with the Archbishop's permission, decided to take his leave, and the latter asked him to convey his greetings to his dear brother, and was sure that he would be glad to hear from him. Rubler wished the gentleman a pleasant time at the banquet, and tenderly embracing his wife, prepared to celebrate the event. The stage turned out to be too empty, which turned out to be a huge problem, and the Archbishop had not originally planned for things to turn out this way. His friend promised to take this year's mistakes into account to make the next holiday perfect, and that's it. Something was missing here today. There was some nice music playing, but this year was the priority. There were still 30 minutes until His Holiness the Pope's speech, but they had no performances scheduled to fill the stage. Satin suggested that the orchestra play to buy some time, but the artists said they had played the entire repertoire that was planned. Kirian started to get nervous, and if he repeated the same song, the guests would lose interest, and he didn't even know what to do in such a situation. Suddenly, a girl approached them and asked if 30 minutes would really be enough to fill the free time. It turned out that the prima had accidentally overheard their conversation, and if there weren't enough artists for the performance, she offered to entrust this matter to her. The lady came here as Mr. Bjorn's companion, but she was also a wonderful singer and could entertain the guests. Kirian was grateful for the desire to help, but was not sure that the orchestra would be able to adjust without rehearsal. The lady offered to sing a song that everyone knew, and asked him to improvise as he wished. No one would pay much attention to the instrumental accompaniment, because the prima was sure that her voice would sound much louder. A solo performance by the prima sounded like the best solution to the problem that had arisen, and if not for the scandal, Kirian would have gladly accepted this offer. There was absolutely no time for rehearsal, and he asked if the lady was ready to perform right now, but Mr. Rubler was against it. Satin asked me to worry about her. The event was much more important, and suggested trusting this girl this time. It worked. The main thing is that the prima was just waiting for her moment of glory, and now she will finally feel what she has been waiting for so long. All eyes were on her, the gorgeous lady standing on stage, ready to perform a solo act. Delilah's voice was truly magnificent, and as soon as she sang the first notes, all the guests froze in admiration. Their expressions changed as soon as the first words of the song sounded, and countless men looked straight at her, yearning to possess her. Among them stood the very man for whom everything had been arranged, Archbishop Kirian, who had never before paid attention to her. The villain had a new place she wanted to reach, and she had already decided that she wanted to go to the very top. The prima filled the time with magnificent singing on stage, her beautiful voice echoing throughout the banquet hall and becoming the perfect rhythm that supported the atmosphere of the ceremony. Ironically, the uninvited guest became the praised performer of the day, and so the foundation day passed, and then she returned to everyday peaceful life. From that day on, Satan never encountered Jorn again, and there was another person who was bothering her, and Rubler immediately noticed it. She was still thinking about his Grace Vitalis, who had looked restless at that event. There were many people around Archbishop Kirian, but despite the fact that he is also the successor, Archbishop Vitalis kept to himself during the banquet. The gentleman assured that there was a reason for this, since Kirian was almost recognized as the next successor. There was no use in confusing people. The next dad will definitely be Kirian, and everyone has already tacitly acknowledged this, and hasn't Satin noticed it yet. The successor had not yet been predicted, and Satine did not want to judge too early until there was an official announcement. They both should have equal rights to the position of Holy Father, but for some reason Kirian stood much higher than a man of his own level. The heroine knew that Kirian's abilities were head and shoulders above, and that over time they had already been proven to many people. Still, the fact that there are two successors to the Pope remains unchanged. People treat one of them as a shadow, which breaks the rules, and it was hard for the lady to watch. Rubler must have understood this too, but at the same time he remained complacent, and could he really have forgotten his duty as a member of the Guardian family because of personal connections? Satin looked upset and thoughtful. She was incredibly worried about this question, and she did not find answers to her doubts. The gentleman wanted to show his wife something, and she had no idea what it could be. He asked her to wait a little and promised to return to show her something interesting. A couple of minutes later, a box with the remains of a sword, the very same relic passed down from generation to generation, lay on the table in front of the girl. The gentleman decided to present the family heirloom of the House of Cardillon, and this was the handle of the holy ball. Seeing such a relic for the first time, the lady admired its power, and Rubler even offered to hold it. Satin was scared. It was a sacred relic. She was sure other people couldn't touch it. Rubler had not considered this girl as another person for a long time, and now she had become his one and only wife. She was only able to touch Delmare's relic recently, and that wasn't what she had in mind at all. The principles of the master's family were different from those of the lady's family in childhood. They simply swung this hilt, played the first Holy Father, and pretended to be heroes. Even Kirian had come to their house once and held the dream in his hands, so there was no reason why she couldn't do it. And before she could even notice, the gentleman deftly took the relic and placed it in her hands, and the lady felt incredible power. Rubler didn't see anything special in this, and he was ready to trust this girl with anything. She felt his hands were incredibly hot as soon as he touched her elbows. The master's hands were so big and warm, and Satin still couldn't get used to the fact that they could freely touch each other. His fingers moved slightly. The girl felt a little ticklish, but she felt great when she held the sacred relic. The gentleman touched her carefully and began to get nervous, and did not understand how such a small body could walk and run. He was curious about how it felt to hold the sacred relic in his hands, but today he felt absolutely nothing about it. In truth, it was exactly the same with the Lord, but Kirian once said that the sacred sword called to him. He had no idea how it happened, and at the time the gentleman simply brushed his friend off, considering his words ridiculous and absurd. Several generations ago, it was difficult to determine the successor through divine revelation. They collected holy relics and allowed everyone to touch them in turn, and in this way it was possible to determine who was the rightful heir. If it weren't for Kirian, the master would have forgotten that story, but since someone actually received the call of the relic, it is difficult to take it lightly. Kirian is the next successor, chosen by the sacred relics, and this is not an official prophecy, but rather something close to foresight. That's why Rubler treated his friend like he was the next in line to his father, and now it became clear to the heroine why he believed that Kirian was the next successor. Satin was glad. This wasn't just a plan to nominate him for the post of Pope, just out of friendship, and for some reason now she felt relieved. Whatever Rubler's ulterior motives, it was important to her that she felt as if she expected something from him. Come to think of it, the girl had been thinking and worrying a lot lately, and Rubler noticed her tense face again. She had long wanted to ask the gentleman one question. No matter how stupid a person is, he will still see Rubler's deep respect and favor towards her. He chose her for one reason, because she keeps showing up and her heart is kind and sincere. In his eyes, no matter how many girls were circling around, there was only her. The one and only Satin, the love of his childhood. Even though she was engaged to the pathetic journey, the gentleman believed her and knew his answer would never change. When she was preparing to marry another, he still desperately wanted to possess her and be near her. And as soon as he saw the opportunity, he shamelessly took advantage of it and did not miss the chance to be with this girl. Rubler did not regret anything and confessed this to his wife, because for the first time he felt how strongly his heart was beating. Gently touching her face, he asked why she suddenly decided to ask such a question. In fact, he has liked her since her studies at the academy, since childhood, when she gave him that very sweet toffee. All his life, the gentleman wanted to live with the girl he loved, and that was precisely why he proposed to her, and he was incredibly happy that fate brought them together. Mr. Quirion was busy with important matters at the papal court when he received an unexpected visitor. Lady Prima Delilah greeted His Grace Archbishop Kirion, but he was hardly expecting her visit today. The young man thanked the lady for her help. The ceremony ended smoothly this year, and he was ready to fulfill any of her requests. The Prima really helped brighten up that boring time during the ceremony, and now she could ask for anything she wanted. Delilah frankly admitted that she didn't need money or fame. She wanted something much more valuable, because that day she filled a huge gap. The lady had the audacity to sit down on the table in front of the young man and offered to fill his personal time this time. She remembered very well the eyes with which Kirian had watched her performance that day, eyes filled with a desperate thirst for her. And she was absolutely sure how a man with such eyes could reject her now, when she was so close. The lady was not mistaken. As soon as she touched Kirian and decided to kiss him, he responded to her initiative with a passionate kiss. There was a knock at the door. A messenger sent by the paladin asked for an audience and said that he needed urgent permission from Kirian. The young man asked to convey that there was no need to obtain permission each time and provided complete control of the situation, expecting a report after the work was completed. The Prima was sitting on his lap, and she wanted to know if Kirian would not even listen to the details, and apparently he trusted this man very much. Kirian admitted that Rubler is his longtime and most devoted friend, and he doesn't doubt him one bit. The lady should know this too. The weight that comes with the paladin's name, Rubler will be the most useful person to him when Kirian finally rules this side. Despite all the formalities, he simply had fun with him. This guy is a hopeless romantic who has been in love with the same girl for many years. The behavior she had seen from Rubler was not an act, and Kirian wanted to know why the lady had left the carriage empty that day. From that very day on, she and Kirian began to meet regularly, and their communication became closer and more passionate. Not afraid of anything, several times he even sent a message to the Selvio estate, inviting the lady to talk to him. Kirian sent the best carriage for her comfort, but the lady was a little uncomfortable when the young man continued to send carriages without warning. She admitted that Mr. Jorn was still stupid, but he was not blind and understood everything perfectly. That day, Jorn wondered why Kirian kept calling her, and even he, whom she considered a pigeon, showed surprising attentiveness. However, it worried him a lot. His mistress was called by another man, but then the lady asked him not to worry about anything. How Jorn first brought her here wasn't much different, using his status to take what belonged to another patron, and he's afraid the same will happen to him. Kirian suggested simply leaving Jorn, assuring him that the lady did not seem to care about his situation at all, since she had sent his carriage away over such a trifle. Looking tenderly into each other's eyes, he found it funny, considering this girl the most amazing, a bold woman who demanded his time, and Kirian acted so arrogantly that he had absolutely no parameters for it. Born into the family of a holy father, raised as an archbishop from birth, this man is confident and proud that he will one day become a successor, and it would be foolish to show stubbornness or pride in front of him. Now Jorn acts as if he gave her his heart, but she was nothing more than another lover, a woman floating with the current, never knowing when she would drown again. Even the position she reached at the very bottom meant nothing, and Delilah survived by bowing her head to those below her. No matter how much she groomed herself or honed her skills, if she was born without status, she would never reach the top, and that only meant one thing. Kirian hugged the lady tenderly, confessing that a friend had once told him that Delilah was the most dangerous woman. It was unclear what he meant, and whether there really wasn't a single man who could handle her, and perhaps he could agree with him on that. Even a man from a family of guardians couldn't cope with someone like her, and Kirian wanted to prove that the lady would one day give in, and he would be able to possess her completely. Delilah decided that if she had to live as someone's mistress, then let it be the ruler's mistress, and she would become the woman of an influential man in the country. She wanted to stand next to the one whom even Lady Satine herself bowed down to. What she could not achieve on her own, she would fill with what belonged to others. And the villainess dreamed of becoming the only woman who passed through both the keeper's family and the chief archbishop. The moon was incredibly huge that night, and Lady Satine stood on the balcony, breathing in the cool night air. Today she couldn't sleep at all. Thoughts were constantly spinning in her head. The answers to the questions troubling her mind turned out to be much simpler. The answer was so simple and clear that it even seemed somehow unfair. And Rubler, as it turned out, really loves her. Almost 3 months have passed since she started living with this man. She thought her life would be terrible with a man who had hated her since childhood. It wasn't as unbearable as the lady had supposed, but sometimes the sudden reduction in distance was awkward. When the gentleman worried about her problems and helped solve them, she was sincerely grateful to him. In the heroine's mind, a husband is a man who will share her home and everyday life with her, the one with whom she can raise Del Mare's heir. That one and only faithful person, the first in her life, the one she can trust infinitely. Only now did I start to think about whether Rubler could become the person with whom she would be ready to spend her entire life. Until now, she couldn't answer this question with certainty, but over time, talking to Rubler about divorce became unpleasant. He looked at her with the saddest expression in the world at the mere mention of divorce. Therefore, the lady did not want to hurt someone who showed such unconditional affection. And if Rubler really had feelings for her all this time, if her childhood memories were just a misunderstanding, then, when he saw how openly she avoided him, he probably felt unbearable pain and despair. Her master was an outcast, and every time he looked after the young lady to whom his heart was drawn. Sighing, Satin realized that there was no point in thinking about it now, and everything happened as it had already happened. After much deliberation, the heroine decided to simply go to her bedroom and fall asleep peacefully on a soft, cozy bed. Suddenly, a wave of horror washed over her, and just now she clearly heard some strange sounds. Besides this, she felt someone's gaze from the dark courtyard of the estate, but she thought it was just her imagination due to fatigue. Trying to make out something in the darkness, Satin obviously realized that she hadn't imagined it, and that there was something there. I ran barefoot back to the estate to find at least someone and tell them that there was clearly someone in the yard. Not only did Satin feel the terrible gaze, but there was also a strange aura around her, and it couldn't be called a simple mistake. She had never felt anything like this before, and she was sure of it, there was definitely someone down there. It was definitely not a person, or even a ghost, and the energy felt much more vile. Her legs were shaking. The girl understood that she had to find Rubler as soon as possible and tell him what had happened. She ran quickly and wanted to find at least one of the servants as quickly as possible, so that under no circumstances would she be left alone for another minute. This feeling could not be compared to anything. Something sinister, hellish, which was located right around the estate, had penetrated into this house. A black haze enveloped the girl's leg, and she felt a piercing cold that reached her bones, as if something had grabbed her. Satine screamed so furiously, as if she saw a hellish demon stretching its tentacles towards her. Rubler heard his wife's loud scream and immediately rushed to help to figure out what could have happened. He saw her sitting and shaking barefoot on the floor. She had just screamed loudly, and she was definitely not okay. Trembling with fear, Satin rushed to the master and screamed, "Something sinister is happening here." She looked at her savior with frightened eyes, assuring him that something was happening in her bedroom, but she didn't understand who was there. The gentleman looked at the girl's bedroom door, but did not see anyone, but she could not deceive him at all. All the servants came running to the screams, worried about my lady, and the master ordered them to go in and inspect the girl's bedroom, because she insisted that there was something there. Even more frightened, she screamed for no one to enter her bedroom, as it could be dangerous there. Everyone was incredibly worried about her behavior, but Laurie looked around the bedroom and admitted that there was absolutely nothing here, and perhaps my lady was imagining things. Satin always trusted her feelings. There was something there, not a person, not an animal, something invisible, and this cold, this frozen heartbeat could not be an ordinary fantasy. The gentleman tried to find out what exactly she saw in her room, but the lady could not answer anything. She was sure that there was something in front of her. It was looking right at her and coming closer, and Satine swore it wanted to hurt her. Rubler asked the lady to calm down and decided to go outside to inspect the estate's courtyard. The lady grabbed him by the shirt so tightly and only prayed that he would never come out. The gentleman had never seen her behave like this, and it probably happened quite rarely. Now his wife looked so frightened, as if she had actually seen something sinister and felt it with every cell of her body. It was already quite late, and the gentleman suggested that they go and rest with the beau while he tried to calm his wife. Laurie offered to stay with her ladies until she fell asleep, but there was no need for the gentleman, because he decided to stay with her. Rubler asked Satin to go spend the night in his room so that she would be more or less safe there. He himself was going to sleep on the sofa, but he offered his wife a large bed, and he was going to stay on duty until the morning so that she would not worry. Now she was incredibly worried that she looked very stupid, but she definitely couldn't control her emotions at that moment. Like a little child who wakes up his parents at night because he was scared of something, and that was a pretty vivid comparison. Satin had never seen anything like this before. Today she felt as if she had fallen into her worst nightmare. She insisted that she saw something. If she was just scared over a trifle, she certainly shouldn't be ashamed now. The gentleman admitted that if someone were to threaten her, he would prefer that she make mistakes 10 or 100 times in a row. The most important thing is that she is completely safe now. He is next to her, and everything is fine. Suddenly, the heroine felt that she had heard these words before, but now they sounded different, and before he came running, she was in complete horror. It seemed that her heart would burst from fear, and as soon as she saw his face, she quickly calmed down and was incredibly happy to see him again. Her body was still shaking from the terrible tremors. The girl just wanted a healing bed and to finally fall asleep after this horror. The gentleman could not understand what had happened that night, but the people only silently went to bed to finally fall asleep. She was no longer in any danger, and while in the master's room she felt protected. Rubler promised that as long as he was by her side, she would always be safe. He would protect her so that she would never again experience such wild fear. Every word penetrated her soul and heart. Satin trusted him, feeling that he would not betray her. And if she ever feels something strange again, she can call him without hesitation, and he will come running faster than anyone else. When the heroine finally calmed down completely, her husband suggested that she go to bed and just forget about this horror. Shivering and alone, sitting on the cold floor, she met her savior and felt it for the first time. That same feeling when you know that you are not alone, and help will always come, no matter where it is. The gentleman gently stroked her face, realizing how scared the girl was. He continued to touch her gently, but suddenly Satin was frightened by this romantic atmosphere. She screamed the word no, asked Rubler not to do anything else, and wanted to run away to sleep. The gentleman understood that she was incredibly worried about intimacy and only timidly kissed her on the forehead. Rubler never insisted on a quick rapprochement and approached his wife very carefully and cautiously. His kiss was so hot that a blush filled the lady's cheeks and she even found it difficult to breathe. The gentleman's sweet smile quickly changed everything, and in his company she was incredibly happy. Rubler felt that the lady was incredibly tired and suggested simply turning off the light and going to bed. After wishing her sweet dreams, he went to his sofa while the girl's heart continued to beat like crazy. And does he really think that after the first kiss, she will now be able to fall asleep so easily because they were still burning with fire? Wrapped in a soft blanket, Satin lay down and closed her eyes, trying to forget about the horror that happened today. She also tried to calm her raging heart, which was clearly beating out a rhythm. The next morning, the gentleman and his assistant went out to check the estate grounds. To their great horror, they found the bloody corpse of a goat, which meant that Satin had been right last night. The man confirmed that there used to be a place nearby where they bred goats, and there must be one, but she escaped from the pen and was probably attacked by a wild animal. The young man was sure that if there had been a wild animal there, Satin would have understood strangely. The kid's body only had bite marks, which reminded him of the unexplained deaths of animals. If what she felt with this was a spirit, if it was approaching her, was near her room, then Satin could end up like this kid. The paladin ordered not to leave the lady alone for a minute until he returned from work, and to split into groups of at least 3 people. Something sinister was clearly going on here, and Satin could have ended up in the clutches of a devilish beast last night. Clutching the weapon's handle tightly, the gentleman understood that this was definitely not a wild animal. He suggested acting quickly before something worse happened, and before someone else became a victim. When Satin woke up, she saw a strange ceiling, and did not immediately understand where she was and how long she had slept. Rubler was in the room. He saw that the girl had woken up, and he himself was in a hurry to go somewhere. The young man warned her that she shouldn't be alone yet because of what happened last night. He just wanted her to finally relax a little and stop worrying about everything that was happening in her life. His name flew softly from her lips, and the gentleman felt how pleasant it sounded. Smiling, the young man stated that the lady should have addressed him that way from the very beginning, but now it was not so important. Satin asked if those evil spirits weren't just an old legend, but unfortunately, it's no longer just a scary story. She heard about this after the wedding. When she went on a mission, they said that traces of the presence of an evil spirit appeared in the provinces. Animal carcasses were scattered everywhere, and this morning a dead kid goat was found in the estate garden, which had been killed like the other animals. He asked Satine not to worry too much. From now on, the Holy Knights would patrol the area every night. The gentleman had to track down something terrible himself, so the lady had to stay home, and that meant he would be returning home late again. Apparently, this is what is needed now to check every corner of the estate, and it is better for Satin to stay in his room to avoid such situations. She might feel uncomfortable staying in his room, but the lady admitted that she did not feel any discomfort at all. After all, the gentleman himself made it clear that he would protect her at any time, and with him by her side, it was the safest decision for her. Hearing this, Rubler smiled sweetly, realizing that the girl had finally begun to trust him completely. It was about an evil spirit that could hardly be slain with a sword, and Satine simply wanted her husband to be careful. He even asked her to repeat these words again, hearing for the first time how sincerely she worried about him. The lady asked if the gentleman had suddenly become hard of hearing, since he was asking her to say the same thing several times. For him, these words sounded like balm for the soul, incredibly pleasant, and the warmth spread throughout his entire body. That evening, the servants watched the proceedings, and everyone had to make sure that all the doors were locked. As the owner of this house, Satin ordered that all the windows be closed and that the curtains not be opened under any circumstances, no matter what happened. She could still believe in a beast, but it was very difficult to believe in an evil spirit, and could such a thing really exist? Laurie thought that demons and evil spirits were just old tales, but if the gentleman himself said so, it was true, and he was not the kind of person to joke about such things. Satin asked the maid to be careful. Rubler said they should be on guard until they caught the evil spirit. For some reason, Laurie smiled very sweetly. She also blushed, and she looked at her mistress in a strange way. The girl admitted that she seemed to feel much more comfortable with the master paladin, and they finally got along. The maid was happy. She knew they would be with each other, and as soon as Satine had time, the heart of their love would blossom like a spring flower. In Larry's imagination, they looked like a couple in love, where the wife greeted her husband with care, giving him her warmth, and he reciprocated. The mistress asked me to stop imagining such nonsense, but the maid was already flying somewhere in the clouds. I imagine how they were passionately embracing. Satin asked Larry to lock all the rooms, and the maid even checked her bedroom herself. But no one expected that the next second there would be a terrible roar, similar to hellish sounds from the dungeon. The sound was unlike any animal roar they had heard before. It seemed to be coming from outside, and no one knew what it was. The lady went down to the servants' living room, asking if they had also heard the terrible noise. The cook was completely at a loss. It was a terrible howl, and many people got goosebumps from the sound alone. In full readiness, the lady understood that the gentleman was not around today, and it seemed that something was wrong here. It was not a hallucination at all, this terrible, piercing scream that all the servants heard. And it became obvious to the lady that an evil spirit had appeared outside the estate and was very close. The last time it appeared, it didn't make that sound, and the heroes didn't know what it was, so they couldn't say for sure that it wasn't a hellish spirit. The servants were terrified. The mistress had to calm them down, but going outside or opening the doors could be even more dangerous. Suddenly, one young man said that it sounded like a horse crying, and for some reason he didn't think that it was about anything more sinister. His words may have sounded strange, but he had heard horses make a similar sound before, but no one could believe that animals could howl like that. A brave servant decided to go to the estate's garden to check if the horses had run out of hay. He ran to the door, but Satin understood that a horse couldn't make such a strange sound, and this guy named Deben probably hadn't kept a proper eye on the stables and scared everyone because of it. The servants were incredibly scared. None of them wanted to go outside, but Deben, as if nothing had happened, decided to check everything himself. The lady turned to one man, who looked extremely pale, and confirmed that something was definitely wrong. When he checked the stables this evening, everything was in perfect order, the horses were calm, and there was plenty of hay and water. Therefore, he was sure that horses had no reason to howl like that, and the pain from it could not be compared to the cry of an animal. In fact, the servants were simply trying to calm down, and were confident that if Deben simply checked and returned immediately, then everything would be fine. The stables were located right next to the main gate, and the lady was well aware of this. If everything is fine and there is enough water and food, then why hasn't Deben returned yet, since quite a lot of time has passed since he left? Everyone waited impatiently and with bated breath for the servant to return. Minutes passed, but he never came. The stables could have been checked in just a few minutes, but the door to the estate was still closed, and the young man was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, a new sound was heard, which was radically different from the previous one, and the frightened heroes could not find their place. Satin was becoming more and more afraid with every second, but she understood that she had to take responsibility as the mistress of this house. She confidently walked towards the door, and it was she who had to open the door and check what was going on outside. Deben was still outside the estate doors, and the lady sternly declared that she was obliged to bring him back. Her heart was pounding wildly. She decided to just at least look through the crack of the door, trying to see something in the darkness. Just yesterday, she had encountered these sensations, which she still felt as if it had just happened. Not long ago, when she first came face to face with an evil spirit, she realized too late why she had not noticed it earlier. Who would have thought that such a creature could be found here, which tightly bound Mr. Deben, who went out to check the stables? Loud screams grew louder. A dark, gloomy aura gripped the young man who found himself alone with the hellish evil spirit. He couldn't even scream. His life was in danger right now, so the heroine bravely decided to save him. Her legs wouldn't obey her at all. She needed to run as fast as possible, but Satin couldn't help herself. She sat looking through the small crack and realized that her body was not moving at all. Everyone heard strange sounds coming from the yard, and no one knew what was going on there. Probably the evil spirit that the mistress spoke of, and none of the servants had any idea what they should do now, or whether they were safe inside. Everyone understood that they had to save Deben, but as Satine saw, people were in incredible panic. It was not without reason that the heroes were horrified. This was the first time they had encountered such a phenomenon. While the master was absent, the lady felt she had to gather her courage and protect the estate, as well as the people dear to her. Satin screamed for a candle to be brought immediately, and now they would all set off together to save their dear friend. A spark of determination flashed in the lady's eyes. She knew she had to protect these people who had become like family to her. The butler brought a candle and asked what they should do next. Satin asked to throw the candle into the yard and see if her plan would work. With all their might, they threw the lit candle straight into the yard, while the evil spirit slowly consumed their dear friend. To everyone's surprise, it actually worked. The dark forces retreated, frightened by the fire, and Deben finally took his first breath of air. Everyone was happy. The thing had worked. Everything had worked quite effectively and quickly, and people started shouting for the young man to come back quickly. But only Satine understood that this was a terrible decision, and he should not come here under any circumstances. A dark, evil spirit was heading straight here. She shouted loudly to close all the doors now, before something sinister penetrated inside the estate. She ordered all the doors to be locked to prevent it from entering, and the butler and other servants held the door handles tightly. The evil spirit saw the heroes and attacked the young man without hesitation, but for some reason let the Diban go, probably to attract more people. The lady tried to understand how the dark force, which was trying in every possible way to penetrate inside, intended to act. Suddenly she remembered the gentleman's words, who reminded her of what they had been taught before at the academy. Demons lurk in the shadows when someone is off guard, and this is likely a hint on how to deal with that demon or evil spirit. I didn't even think I'd be able to remember this, but Rubler's words turned out to be the key to the solution. Demons hide in the shadows, which means they don't like light. This evil spirit also previously bent its body to avoid the light from the candle. Then the only way to defeat the evil spirit is to light a strong bright light or flame of fire, which can scare it away. There was complete silence in the living room, and Satin felt an evil spirit approaching because the door was still ajar. Through a small gap between the doors, the heroes saw the black hand of an entity with crooked fingers that looked like twisted branches. Laurie screamed loudly. The entity penetrated inside, and the butler suggested throwing the candle again to drive it away. The lady asked them to wait a little, not to panic, because now they had to act prudently. If they drive away the evil spirit in this way and barricade themselves in the house, they will be safe. But what about Deben lying outside? And what about the nearby houses or the houses of ordinary people? If the evil spirit's hunt fails here, it will go to the neighboring village in search of prey, and the people who know nothing will be attacked without a chance to escape. The heroine knew that this evil spirit did not like her, and she offered to open the door and let him in and stop him right there. The idea sounded unimaginable. The weak point of the spirit is light. The heroine was sure that if you put him in a room full of advice, he can be held until the master arrives. The maid wasn't sure if they had enough light to brightly illuminate the mansion, but Satin had an interesting idea and touched the painting, which had oil paint in it. The heroes decided to collect as many torches and candles as possible. As soon as the evil spirit entered the house through the open door, they needed to be ready. Everyone would spread out to create light, so as not to create shadows, and while the spirit was confused, Satine was going to drive it into any room, luring it into a trap. The heroes collected all the paintings, and the lady decided to take care of burning and destroying the hated evil spirit, and at the same time save Deben. And until Rubler returned, she needed to be brave and decisive. She believed that somehow, together, they could do it. Laurie did not leave the lady's side, and suddenly she noticed a dark, evil entity approaching them. The maid closed her eyes and became frightened, while the warlike mistress put a candle forward to drive away the hated demon. For a while, the dark entity hid in the shadows, and perhaps a large fire needed to be lit around the room, which is why they collected oil paintings. Laurie was puzzled as to which room could possibly contain an evil spirit, but there was one room in the estate that was currently unused, and the mistress's bedroom, in which no one was supposed to become an ominous trap for the dark spirit. Laurie insisted that as soon as this creature entered the room, the mistress should leave it immediately. Satin understood this perfectly well, but a situation could arise where she would have to stay inside. It seemed that the evil spirit was also watching, but he did not come closer and was afraid of the light from the lit candle. Without letting go of the fire, Satin tried to think through every step to lure the sinister spirit into a trap. She asked the maid to take the candle for a minute, while Laurie, with frightened eyes, did not understand why she and my lady were going to do this. Determined, Satine wanted to lure the evil spirit into the room, but it seems that now it cannot get closer because the light from the flame is too bright. She promised that everything would be fine, there would be candles inside too, and she just needed to light them before the evil spirit approached. She had to fight one-on-one, face-to-face, with a dark creature that had arrived here to devour everyone in this estate. The lady acted carefully, realizing that if the evil spirit went deeper into the room, as it did now, she would definitely succeed. She certainly couldn't have expected the evil spirit to enter the room with lightning speed, and only this creature didn't fall for her trap, but tried to close the room along with her. There was only one option left, to find light, and Satin looked around for anything to light the candle on. She couldn't let this creature get any closer to her, but with every cell she felt its approach. A black aura swirled around the frightened lady. She covered her face with her hands and sat on the floor, and it was the most terrible feeling she had ever experienced. Suddenly he was here, her faithful and devoted savior, Mr. Rubler, who had appeared so suddenly. The first thing the young man did was shout to see if his wife was hurt, and right now he was going to fight the demon. Satin was perfectly fine. More importantly, she was worried about the evil spirit that was circling around them right now. The master definitely felt it when he struck him with his sword, which had magical power, and it seemed like he was not hurt at all. Rubler understood that he would have to tear the magical spirit apart, but right now he was going to hide during these days and seize the moment to attack. He felt the ancient blood of warriors, invincible in their faith and courage, flowing through his veins. The blade in his hand became an extension of his will, a conductor of his rage. Fighting something that has no physical form that will reform itself even if you cut it into pieces. Even Mr. Rubler has a limit to his endurance. He tried to cut the magical spirit with blows, but at this rate it might never end. Satin couldn't just stand aside, and she was sure that the item she needed was definitely somewhere nearby. Finally, on the table she saw what she needed, and what could finally help put an end to all this horror. The spirit roared, crashing down on Rubler with a stream of darkness and cold, but Rubler was ready. He parried the blow with his sword, cutting off part of the dark mass. No matter how much the master swung his sword, the darkness did not become less. It continued to regenerate, and the heroes simply walked in circles. Satin screamed loudly. Evil spirits are afraid of light, and a lit candle appeared in her hand, illuminating the dark room. She suggested that they use light to drive the dark spirit into a corner, and asked her husband to make sure that the sinister creature could not hide anywhere else. Satin raised her hand, and the light in her palm flared with renewed vigor. A beam of energy pierced the darkness, scorching the spirit and causing it to convulse. This gave Rubler a chance. He rushed forward, the sword in his hand flashing like lightning, and delivered a decisive blow, cutting the spirit into pieces. The gentleman loudly asked her to throw the candle straight into the heart of the evil spirit so that they could finally defeat him. Fire and the dark evil spirit fought each other in an eternal dance of destruction and creation, the flame, like a living creature, greedily devouring the darkness. Rubler and Satin, exhausted but victorious, stood together, leaning on each other, a symbol of hope for a world just freed from an eternal nightmare. Finally, the last cry of the evil spirit died down, and with it the last day was dispelled, and this meant that the heroes had succeeded. Then she couldn't hold back and buried her face in her husband's chest, and a loud cry of despair came from her throat. Her legs were giving way. She was incredibly tense the whole time, and she didn't know how this whole horror would end. But she didn't feel any pain at all. She was fine. She just felt a slight tremor throughout her body. Servants ran into the room, having been incredibly worried about their master and mistress the whole time, but fortunately, no one was injured. Larry was crying. She was afraid that something terrible had happened, and fortunately, the first rays of the sun had already risen. Surrounded by weeping servants, Satine looked out the window at the rising sun and felt relief, and it was the end of a night that was worse than any nightmare. Everyone could breathe a sigh of relief and relax. The evil spirit was defeated, and the lady's first thing she wanted to do was take a hot bath to cleanse herself. She wasn't sure if it could be called luck, but one thing could be said. Fortunately, Dieben's body was not harmed. He is alive, but the scar that the evil spirit left behind has gone deep into his flesh and will not disappear until the end of his life, but it is still a great fortune that he is alive. Last night the master became very angry with the servants and scolded each one. Satine found this unfair. Everyone was in equal danger, but the paladin was more worried about the mistress and scolded them harshly because they left her alone. Rumor has it that this was the first time the servants had seen him so angry. Luckily, everyone was alive. Satina was safe, but that night would forever leave a mark on her soul. After a hot bath, Larry suggested that the mistress put on a translucent nightgown. It was hidden deep inside, so it did not burn or smell of smoke. And even if the lady doesn't like it, this time nothing can be done, because the smoke has reached her wardrobe. By chance, Rubler entered the room and saw his wife in a beautiful transparent nightgown. For some reason, there was some anger on the gentleman's face. He asked if there was something about Satin that he still didn't know about. The lady was surprised, but the young man had just heard everything on his way here, and he certainly didn't expect his wife to do such a thing. While fighting the evil spirit, she called upon him to become a bait, wanting to commit such a reckless act, but the master knew nothing about it. The lady stated that it was necessary to capture the evil entity, but Rubler stated that it was his job and she did not need to interfere. She had no idea when he would return, so she decided to take matters into her own hands, which made the gentleman unhappy. In this story, she said she couldn't stand still when someone's head was bitten off right in front of her eyes. She put herself in danger, she said. If she wasn't a knight, then why should she just stick her head in the sand while someone died in front of her? The young man said menacingly that she must avoid a danger that she obviously could not cope with, and that an evil spirit could attack her. Satin stated that she shouldn't have just stood there and watched, and that she was simply trying her best to help. The conversation became increasingly tense. The gentleman wanted to say that she didn't have to do this, but if she had stayed away, people would have died. And she was not at all eager to risk herself, and she was sure he would understand her. The lady tried her best to protect the residents of the estate, and did not need your praise for it. She would never have thought that he would look at her like that now, and he probably doesn't even imagine how much she wanted him to be there then. Satin had simply suggested they forget about it, and they had both done the best they could in that terrible situation, and she was actually very tired. And most of all, the gentleman was angry. She could get hurt, and he might never see her again. Turning around, the lady understood his mood. He did not wish her any harm. He was simply very worried. When Rubler saw how this evil spirit rushed at her, his heart almost broke. If he had come a little later, everything could have turned out terribly. The young man looked like he was trembling. It was the first time she had seen him like this, and she couldn't even imagine how much it disappointed him. At that very moment he realized that his words could upset the girl, and he admitted that he was very sorry and that he did not want to argue with her at all. The gentleman was simply angry with himself because he had made a promise to protect his girlfriend, but he had managed to do so almost at the very last moment. For him, ensuring her safety was his only duty, and he was a great paladin. And for her, he was not just a dear person, her faithful husband, who was obliged to make her happy. She stood there in her translucent nightgown while they had a serious conversation, where Satin felt more and more supported. He was able to take a place next to her. He had been waiting for this all his life, and now he was not ready to lose her. Rubler looked incredibly upset and stated that if she died, he would not be able to bear it. To be honest, she admitted it. She really was reckless, and as he said, she was not a great warrior at all. But if she hid out of fear, what would happen to the people of the estate and the neighbors in the villages because they are obliged to protect them? The most important thing for her now was his words. He was next to her, and until the end of her days, she would be safe. Therefore, she probably subconsciously believed in the strength of her husband, in his desperate love, and knew that he would come and save her, no matter what happened. With great happiness and warm feelings in her soul, the lady thanked her husband for keeping his faithful promise and being there. After these words, Rubler hugged his beloved wife, and he was simply happy to enjoy this moment. Having thanked the lady for believing in himself and for saving people, he was once again convinced that she was the one, an amazing and unique girl whom he once managed to meet in his life, and how this man always says exactly what she needs to hear at the perfect moment. All of Rubler's words were sincere. He looked into her eyes with his gratitude and great admiration. It was a strange feeling, and they both just couldn't hold back the urge to touch each other any longer, and finally their lips touched for the first time. The passionate desire could no longer be kept within themselves, and in the dark semi-darkness of the room, they found themselves together on the bed. The gentleman kissed his wife passionately, she reciprocated, and it was the most wonderful moment. A strong and warm arm wrapped around her shoulder, and the soft, melting warmth from his kiss penetrated Satine, scattering thoughts like sand. The deeper she sank into her kiss, the more the world slipped from under her feet. She could do it, and she looked at the beautiful moment of their bodies not as a marital duty. There was only one thing on her mind now. It was just wonderful that one day he showed up and ruined her wedding. Their lips could not tear themselves away from the hot kisses, their fingers intertwined, and their bodies were getting closer and closer. Suddenly the lady asked if this was not his first time, because he was too good a kisser. The young man decided to joke that he had already done this 200 times, and Satin did not expect to hear such an answer. It was all just in his imagination. He was imagining their first kiss. That's why everything was so passionate. For some reason, Satin's heart, who thought he was a real pervert, was beating faster and faster. The young man couldn't help himself. He was always like this, tenderly touching the hand of his beloved girl. From the very moment he realized that he was in love with her, his feelings raged, and his mind was clouded by kisses and hugs. A thrill passed through their touching palms, and Satin wanted to stay there forever, immersed in this rhythm. Now nothing bothered her. She simply continued to dive, feeling such strong emotions for the first time. The girl's bedroom was completely trashed after a battle with an evil spirit, and it will probably take several months to dismantle and repair everything. For the gentleman, this was the most joyful news he had heard today. Satin will no longer have to return to her room while it undergoes long-term renovations. Satin crossed her arms over her chest and covered her transparent nightgown. Frankly, she wanted to confess something. All this time, she didn't really feel like she was married to this man, and didn't feel any closeness. The lady had married without any determination or preparation, and had always hated anything that happened without a plan. Her marriage was one of the most important events in her life. In one night she changed her husband, and she continued to wander in her soul, not knowing how to sort it all out. Now she knew that she needed the help of a man who had become dear to her during this time. The heroine was still confused about this, and had never thought about such a situation, and now that very moment had come. One day Rubler told me that he had been imagining life with her for a long time, and now she was finally ready, asking the gentleman to teach her this. That close warmth that he imagined every night, remembering the only girl who had captured his heart. She wanted to hear about the future he had dreamed of all his life, carefully keeping this love in his soul. It was the first time she had seen the gentleman so embarrassed, because they both understood what was being discussed. The gentleman was so embarrassed and didn't even understand what to do, and Satin was scared. Was it really awkward for him to talk about it out loud? And it wasn't about that at all, not about the words, it's just that right now he was incredibly happy. Their kisses became more and more passionate, and Satin felt more and more uninhibited. Rubler could never have imagined that she would ever ask him something like this, and it seemed like his heart was about to burst and shatter into tiny pieces. He imagined absolutely everything, and Satin was indignant. Was this really exactly what he didn't expect? Because this moment was supposed to happen anyway. Touching each other with their fingers, he became happier with every second, because now it seemed that she had truly accepted him as her husband. She didn't have the slightest chance of escaping, because from now on he intended to treat her like a real wife, and their intimacy grew stronger and stronger. The kiss was a promise, a vow of fidelity, and a silent covenant to love each other until their last breath. Noticing that the girl was too nervous, the gentleman decided to ask her directly to calm her down. In fact, he was too calm. He was incredibly happy that everything was happening exactly this way. They knew that as long as they were together, as long as their hearts beat in unison, nothing could break them. Having kissed her hand, the young man admitted that he was also very worried, but he just didn't show it. Satin thought he was just lying and saying he was worried, but how could he be so sweet and shameless at the same time in such a situation? And at the same time, incredibly persistent, because his hot kisses continued to burn her body. Rubler noticed her confusion and smiled softly. This look, full of warmth and understanding, made her feel a little calmer. She looked away, trying to hide her flushed cheeks under strands of loose hair, but his gaze was too intense, penetrating into her very soul. Suddenly, memories of their childhood came to his mind. The young lady Satine Del Mare, even during her time at the academy, was such a little girl who stood out wherever she went. Every time Rubler looked at her, he couldn't help but think about her and imagine his future next to her. He dreamed of taking her hand at least once in his life and kissing those tender lips that smiled a happy smile every time. He knew that at that moment he would become the happiest man in the world, and he would not need anything else. During his entire time at the academy, the young gentleman was never able to win her attention. One day, he gave up and realized that the girl would never accept him, trying to get rid of strong feelings. Yet the light she emitted was so dazzling that he couldn't help but miss her. And now that very hand he could only dream of was finally within his reach, and the young man felt he had received a reward for his endless years of waiting. The next morning, the gentleman was in an incredibly good mood. He was floating somewhere in the clouds and felt simply incredible. Satin didn't look so happy. She lay with her back to him and seemed unwilling to talk. Rubler said the weather was so nice today and asked how she managed to sleep. When the conversation turned to sleep, the lady became indignant, and she didn't even care at all about the beautiful weather. She stated that after he had tormented her all night, because of which she could not even close her eyes, the gentleman had no conscience at all. The young man laughed. His wife was sulking early in the morning, and it looked incredibly cute. Rubler did not want to part with her for a minute, and continued to hug her, not wanting to go anywhere. And wasn't it enough for him to spend the whole night with her, in tender embraces? Seriously, if her body were water, she would have evaporated long ago from the hot touches. The lady stated that the young man was too clingy from the very beginning, and she did not expect that he would hug her all night. Satin was a little indignant, and even yesterday he couldn't stop kissing her. And as soon as she remembered last night, her cheeks burned like fire, and her body trembled from the first night spent together. Satin became even more embarrassed, admitting that he was too persistent, and in any case she needed to wait a little. It was her first time, and she asked him not to take her words to heart, so as not to upset her husband. The gentleman was inclined to concentrate only on what he liked, and if he had such a passion for studying, he would definitely have graduated from the academy with honors. Yet last night he definitely realized that he had discovered another incredible talent within himself. The wall between them collapsed. Satine felt vulnerable, and the young man gently suggested that she explore a little more. Every kiss was a confession, an apology, gratitude, hope, everything that they had not had time to say to each other over the years. Satin responded to his kisses with her eyes closed, letting the feelings overwhelm her. A voice was heard behind the door. The gentleman needed to get ready. He angrily told the assistant to shut up, because his mood had only just begun to improve. Satin asked him to try not to do this in broad daylight, since servants often pass by his room. For some reason, the gentleman looked at her very strangely, and she immediately recognized this animalistic gaze. The young man confessed that he was simply thinking about how he could please his white and fluffy wife today, but at that moment, a pillow flew at him. Wrapped in a blanket, the lady suggested that he simply go to work, and that he had long-awaited business. The matter with the evil spirit was not yet finished. It was necessary to report to His Excellency, and the wife only asked not to be late. As he said goodbye, he asked his beloved to sleep a little longer while he was gone, while his lips slid over her cheeks, forehead, neck, leaving behind a slight tremor, promising to return soon. Rubler arrived to Kirian to report that Satin had caught an evil spirit that had not been mentioned recently. An evil spirit was wandering around the estate, and the lady took care of it while the gentleman was away on patrol. To be honest, when he said that he would strengthen security because of the evil spirit, Kirian thought that he was half joking, and then the Archbishop agreed without asking questions. Kirian explained it this way: the master asked for it, and he believed that he must have a good reason for it. Rubler began to doubt whether it was really normal for the Archbishop to take things so lightly. He didn't know whether he should be grateful for this or angry at his best friend for such frivolity. People were saying that they were a couple, and Kirian asked if he was referring to the rumors that they were secretly dating and that all that talk had now died down. In his opinion, no matter how loving he was, he shouldn't take credit for his wife's achievements. He couldn't believe how a small, fragile woman could subdue an evil spirit. Satin was a descendant of one of the guardian families. She instantly recognized the spirit's weak point and destroyed it with one blow, and the master only helped her a little. Rubler said that his wife is truly brave and brilliant, and that the credit really belongs to her. Kirian didn't believe his words, and could it be that married life had turned him into an inveterate braggart? Perhaps he was jealous of his friend, and he admitted that it was hard to be alone without that, but the gentleman did not regret it anyway. As soon as the conversation turned to relationships, Rubler asked if the Archbishop wanted to marry anyone. The one who swore that he would never be tied to anyone by marriage was Rubler, despite the fact that Kirian was popular and did not even pay attention to girls. Previously, training had been the best pastime for the gentleman, but the young man did not remember him saying such words. The Archbishop sighed and admitted that, frankly speaking, he thought that he would be the only one who would forever receive it on the occasion of marriage. He was sure that his friend had changed a lot, but he denied everything, and he was not at all against family ties from the very beginning. It was just that while others wanted to spend time with her, he only yearned for one person who never looked his way. And this person was a little girl, kind and sympathetic, who always helped others. The Archbishop noticed that his friend seemed happier lately, and before they both ignored the very idea of marriage, but now everything was different. Since Rubler got married, he goes home every evening, and his friend remains here alone, and the gentleman suggested that he stop being lonely and start his own family. Ordinary noble houses worry about their heirs, not to mention those for whom the Holy See is at stake. In fact, Kirian did not think so, and even His Holiness the Pope did not say anything about such a thing. He asked what marriage was like. Maybe it was a stupid question, but the gentleman said that marriage is just wonderful. Once Kirian experiences this for himself, he will understand how his friend feels if he decides to get married. The Archbishop asked not to leave him in limbo and to tell him what he really wanted to convey to him. Kirian's colorful personal life is well known, but he is a man who understands the responsibility that comes with his position in society, and he is not one of those who makes scandals after the wedding, and only carries out his sacred work responsibly. Therefore, the gentleman decided it would be better not to interfere in the life of a personal friend unless absolutely necessary. Everything would have been too simple if he hadn't accidentally found a red hair on the sofa. This shade of red is unmistakable, and after looking at the bright hair, the gentleman immediately understood who it belonged to. Kirian began to get very nervous, and the gentleman declared that he was sure that there was definitely a prima in his office. She is the only red-haired woman he knows, but the Archbishop denied it at all costs. The friend asked why her hair was lying on the sofa and whether she had really come into his office. The young man said that the lady was not forbidden from visiting him, he simply thanked her for her help in organizing the grand festival. According to him, this was really all that connected them, but the prima was not one of those who would come just like that. The gentleman began to slowly flush and menacingly asked if Lady Delilah really didn't interest him at all. At the moment, the prima was Mr. Gjorn's mistress, and if the Archbishop got involved with her, it would only harm his reputation. The friend simply asked Rubler to do him a favor and stop being nosy, stating that there was nothing between him and Delilah. The gentleman had long known that Kirian was interested in this girl, but he had always put respect above curiosity, and he thought this meant he was keeping his distance. Now his words sounded implausible, and Kirian had never called this girl by name before, which said a lot. He only asked not to say that she was the same woman he was soon going to marry, but Kirian declared who he took him for. And does he really think that he is so out of his mind that he would make another man's mistress his wife, and told her that he just met with her a few times? Still, the gentleman managed to find out that Kirian was dating this girl, and clearly everything happened for a reason. The young man didn't mention it because he was sure it wasn't important at all, but now Rubler knew a certain truth. Kirian admitted that it cannot be denied that her face and figure are seductive, and the value of a flower lies in how briefly it blooms. The friend was sure that the Archbishop should quickly find a suitable wife, and he understood perfectly well what he was trying to tell him. How often does a man find a woman like his wife, who has status, wealth, honor, and beauty, and most have to compromise? According to Kirian, the first thing people usually give up is external beauty. The gentleman shouted, "Is his friend really telling the truth? This woman is dating him without any ulterior motives, and soon she will be shouting his name across the continent." After all, the prima wants to increase her status, and while she uses his name, Kirian enjoyed her charm, and the only one who wouldn't like it was Gjorn. Everyone already knows the Archbishop is a flirt, and even if he plays around with Lady Delilah a little, people will simply say he's at it again. In his opinion, there was nothing wrong with having a little fun while you could. For the Archbishop, this was just a fleeting affair, and absolutely nothing serious was in the offing. Rumors about the evil spirit spread with astonishing speed. Everything was published in the newspapers, and since Satin personally came face to face with the evil spirit, she received dozens of letters full of concern. The first to arrive at the estate was her mother, who wanted to find out what it all meant. She heard a warning about the appearance of an evil spirit and wondered what kind of strange conversations were going on, but judging by the state of the room, the newspapers were not lying. The mother was glad that her daughter was definitely safe, but even so, she was not sure that it would remain so in the future. In the legend, there was not just one evil spirit, there were countless of them. Any of them could appear at any moment. Satin assured that everything would be calm for a while, but this caused pain to people, and Mother was worried. Mother suggested renting a house in the city, in a place too remote, but now this was unrealistic for Satin. There was only one joy. Cardillon was next to his wife, and if it had been an ordinary person, she would have died long ago. 200 years ago, demons and evil spirits disappeared. People found peace forever. But was it really a peaceful era? Perhaps they simply did not notice it, and evil spirits were always nearby. Despite the fact that this is a holy land, where the power of the Holy Father is strongest, an evil spirit still settled here. There may no longer be a place safe from evil spirits, but fortunately the damage was less than if they had allowed an evil spirit to roam the city streets. Mother Beautiful heard all the information from the newspapers, and as long as the paladin is in this city, everyone will be safe. Sir Cardillon is not the only paladin of the Holy Knights, and the heroine was also a descendant of a holy family. Therefore, her presence here also played a huge role. The mother heard that her daughter herself took measures to save people, and she was incredibly proud of her daughter. Satin didn't say that she could have actually gotten into trouble, so that her family wouldn't worry. Suddenly, the mother asked whether her daughter lived in different rooms with her husband. She seemed to be the only one using this room, and in her opinion, this was not surprising. It wasn't just that there were a lot of things here and the bride, there wasn't a single thing of her husband's in this room. And Mother suddenly asked if he hadn't had his wedding night yet, and after her words, Satin began to get nervous. She assured them that they were doing everything that was required of them, and that Mother did not have to be interested in every little thing. It was good that Mother understood that they were on good terms, and her heart was at peace. On the day she received the holy relic from the main house, she felt her daughter was depressed. Then the mother thought that her daughter was just pretending that everything was fine, and in fact, she was unhappy. She must have given the precious symbol to Del Mare in the hope that she and Rubler would live well together, but in the end, all that was left behind was awkward behavior. How much she had been worried all this time. Having a daughter who showed reluctance, stopped the marriage and waited for her to finally show recognition of her feelings. Then Mother was right. Satin was not herself, and did not understand what to expect from this marriage. At that time, she was busy taking care of herself. He didn't have time to look around, but when peace returned to her heart, Satine understood everything. She finally began to understand that she was surrounded by wonderful, kind people, and how much her life had changed. When the prejudices she had carried all this time were dispelled, she understood the meaning of the gaze that was always directed only at her. Peace came to her heart in a form she never expected to see when she found herself next to Rubler. She felt at peace and imagined what would happen if they had a child, because after all, Del Mare's genetic characteristics were known to everyone. Satin hoped that the baby would inherit his father's temperament, who was a talented swordsman, and she could already imagine how the master would teach him fencing. And it will probably be a pretty wonderful future, the one she always dreamed of. The daughter confessed to her mother that she really was doing well, and now she could believe her. The happy smile on her face meant that everything turned out better than she even expected. To unwind a bit, Satina decided to meet other aristocrats and visit a famous salon in the city. Madame Eckley, with whom she was well acquainted, heard that the lady had to go through a difficult ordeal. Many people were worried about her condition, and it was a huge relief to them to know that Satin was safe. Suddenly the lady asked if Satine had caught a cold, because she looked a little strange. Her dress turned out to be too warm to wear in the salon, where it was quite hot. In fact, she tried to hide the kisses on her neck, and she could not at all tell that these marks left by her husband do not disappear. Satin had to answer. Perhaps she really did have a bit of a cold, and given the location of the new house, it could be chilly in everyday life. The lady guessed that it was indeed quite windy on the outskirts, and decided to have a serious talk with her husband as soon as she returned home. The ladies discussed whether, if the couple was planning to start a family later, it might be better to move closer to the area. Now the heroine preferred independent freedom, away from her parents. The aristocrats realized that newlyweds needed to spend a lot of time alone, and one of them said that she and her husband went to a resort and lived there for about 2 years. The lady asked if Madame Satine was planning to go on a trip with her master. They didn't really have a real honeymoon. Rubler was often away on business, and it was hard for him to take his descent, so nothing could be done. Now she wondered if they could take another longer vacation if she asked Kyrian politely. If she does that, she probably won't be able to get out of bed for the entire time they're at the resort. Satin simply admitted that her husband was constantly busy keeping the city's people safe. And I wanted to say that using ridiculously good stamina to maintain public safety is the best way to increase his authority. While the lady was discussing something with her friends, she didn't notice how Rubler came up to her from behind and rescued her with a beautiful pink bouquet. He heard her words and admitted that he had no idea that his wife valued him so highly. Satin was surprised how he managed to end up here. In fact, he heard that his wife was here and decided to go get her. The bouquet looked enchantingly sweet, and Satin couldn't take her eyes off it. For some reason, these delicate pink flowers reminded Rubler of his sweet wife, just as refined and fragrant. All eyes were turned in their direction. The aristocrats silently watched how fabulous the couple in love looked. At that moment, Satin felt so awkward because every lady was looking straight at her. For the first time after the wedding, the gentleman met Lady Eclay and greeted the lady. All this time, Satin was incredibly awkward, and the lady confessed that the show in which they two are the main characters had just begun. For a moment the lovers were silent, not understanding what exactly was being discussed. It turns out that the theater is currently showing an adaptation of their story, from their first meeting to their wedding. The audience was incredible. The romantic, dramatic love story looked simply wonderful. This story touched the people deeply, and the gentleman asked with interest where this was being held. After all, they were the main characters, and Rubler said it would be simply impolite not to see the fascinating show with his own eyes at least once. Satin would never have thought that they would end up going to the theater. The gentleman had not previously been interested in plays, but was educated enough to enjoy art. It was their love story, and Rubler had to make sure that her appeal was conveyed well. The lady always knew that he was truly a gifted talker, and it was impossible to refuse him. The heroes entered the theater, and the gentleman knew better than anyone else that all this was not just words. The National Theater, which is staging this show, is on par with the Grand Theater where the great Prima sang. Since Delilah's current position had become irrelevant, she could not act out the story, and the big theater could not use the scandal as material. As a result, the Bolshoi Theater lost most of its clients after that scandalous wedding. The heroine knew that from this moment on the gap would only widen, and soon everyone would forget about Delilah. Rubler brought his wife to the most honorable seats, and the lady was in such a luxurious theater for the first time. She was surprised to see a box, and the young man asked if not all the theaters in Delmar had a box. Her father always said that one should watch actors' performances and singing from closer to the stage, and indeed, the girl saw a box for the first time. He said that from the box seats you can see the entire stage well, but it is difficult to truly appreciate the actors' facial expressions and their performances. Little Satin and her father always watched the action from the front row, so she didn't have much experience with such places. Well, there practically wasn't if we don't talk about that terrible day when she went to the theater with her husband. It was the day she first went to a show with Jorn and saw him sighing over the girl's friend. The place reminded her of that terrible day, her broken heart, and the bitter memory of what happened. The box was quiet and dark, which helps you focus on the performance, but Rubler admitted that if you draw the curtains, you get a private room where no one can see what's going on inside. Satin noticed his wicked thoughts and declared that it was better to look at the stage than to draw the curtains, but unless he intended to come to the theater with another intention. The gentleman was so close that Satin immediately understood why he had chosen these particular places. He deftly drew the curtain. In fact, he reserved the bed for the sole purpose of trying something out. Human adaptability is truly frightening, and not long ago Satin was startled by just one touch from Rubler. But now, in this dark box, in a theater full of people, she passionately indulged in his kisses. She had become accustomed to the pleasant kisses that now came without any warning, and she no longer felt awkward. The lady understood that he had planned this from the very beginning, and she could not even believe how impudent her husband turned out to be. Satin was just worried that if someone saw them kissing right in the big theater, unpleasant rumors might start. There was indeed truth in her words, and the gentleman understood this perfectly, and this time one passionate kiss was enough for him. He opened the curtains and admitted that he could not let others see her incredible beauty, which could not be compared to the beauty of the universe. The performance had already begun, with the lead actors playing roles depicting true, eternal love, while Satin and Rubler watched the grandiose performance of their own destiny, wanting to experience every magnificent moment and see how their great story began.